Chapter 1022. The time when Aegon unified the 7 countries was the first year of Westeros history. 15,000 BC. For the whole world it was the era of the descendants of God, but for the eternal gods it was the end of this glorious era. In less than 10,000 years the next world fall would happen. Liang Mu had no hope of saving the world, and he was in despair. His spirit began to split into two. Nu Xiao had been teaching the wind song for 30,000 years, but now he had to stop for the time being. His worldview was about to collapse. 15,000 BC, 12,000 BC, it was the Dawn Era. The ancestors crossed the narrow sea and entered the Westeros. They clashed with the children of the forest, the giants and other Westeros natives. In the end, they signed an oath on the Thousand Faces Island, and the Green Man organization was born. Liang Mu didn't care about these small things. The children of the forest were divided for the first time, and the liberal faction and the deceiver faction began to appear. Nu Xiao traveled abroad and began to rebuild his worldview. 12,000 BC, 800 BC, 4,000 years of the hero era. The ancestors gave up their original religion in the continent of Ursos and fully converted to the old gods. Humans who gained the recognition of the children of the forest began to flourish. Many gifted human kings learned from the children of the forest. The strongest group became demigods, and then created the kingdom of the descendants of God in the Westeros. They were remembered as heroes by humans, so this period was called the Hero Era. For example, Green Hand Garth created the Gardner family, ruled River Bend for at least 1,000 years, and was proficient in the magic of plants and life. Wherever Green Hand went, farms, villages, and orchards would be full of vitality. It was said that he had a cloth bag that contained all the seeds of the world's crops. It was said that when he touched an infertile woman or an old woman without menstruation, they would be able to give birth again. Girls became mature in front of him. Mothers became pregnant with twins or even triplets under his blessing, and little girls became menstruating girls under his smile. Wherever he went, nobles and ordinary people were willing to offer their chaste daughters to him. Their crops would have a good harvest in the coming year, and the fruit trees would be full of fruit. Girls who were raped by him would also be pregnant with strong sons or beautiful daughters. This was why the nobles of Riverbend emphasized the Green Hand family. The Riverbend feudal lords were all established by the direct descendants of Green Hand Garth. Lord Eel's family was originally a Riverbend noble family, but because they were not part of the Green Hand faction, they were ostracized and suppressed. In the end, they had no choice but to migrate to the north, which was thousands of miles away. White Harbor's Mandalay family was loyal to Winterfell because of Stark's kindness in the Northern Territory. Actually, even Stark and Lannister were part of the Green Hand faction. During the heroic era, Green Hand Garth was the king of the River Bend, Durin was the king of the Land of Storms, Grey Sea King was the king of the Iron Islands and the River Gap, and Griffin King, the ancestor of the Royce family, who passed down a set of magic bronze armor to this day, 10,000 years later, and also the ancestor of Bronze John, was the king of the valley. They were all semi-god heroes, and they all ruled the kingdoms for thousands of years. Among the remaining 3 of the 7 kingdoms, clever Lannister of the West didn't have any extraordinary talents, and he was as short as a dwarf, but he was smart and eloquent. He slept with the daughter of the original owner of Casterly Rock City, and became the head of the family. Lannister's background wasn't simple. He was the illegitimate son of Green Hand Garth's daughter. Could it be a coincidence? Why does Lannister look so similar to Tyrion? There was something even more coincidental. Dornder had many deserts and mountains. It was remote and desolate, and most of them were tyrants like the fallen city Dane. Before 2000 BC, before Nymeria led the Nuenar people across the sea, Dornder didn't have a unified king. Finally, there was the North. The North also had a semi-god king, but it had nothing to do with Stark. He was the founder of the Bolton family of the Skinners. From the map of the Northern Territory, it could be seen that the most fertile White Blade River plain in the center of the Northern Territory didn't belong to Stark, but to the Bolton family. Why? Before the arrival of Stark, the Bolton family had already built a castle and established a kingdom there. The founder of Winterfell Stark was the city builder Brandon. What was the background of Brandon? Or rather, where did the Stark family live 8,000 years ago? The city builder Brandon had an extraordinary background. His father was Bloodblade Brandon, a semi-god king, and the son of Green Hand Garth. Bloodblade Brandon was called Bloodblade because he participated in the War of the Children of the Forest 12,000 BC. He slaughtered the giants of River Bend. As he killed too many children of the forest, the blood he shed dyed the Emerald Lake red. Bloodblade Brandon was born in the Dawn era before 12,000 BC. His son, city builder Brandon, participated in the construction of the Great Wall after 800 BC. This time span, city builder Brandon accepted the mission of building the Great Wall and guarding the Northern Territory. He left his hometown and migrated to the Northern Territory to build Winterfell and establish the House of Stark family. City builder Brandon, clever Lane, Jon, and Tyrion. Looking at their backgrounds and fates, it was as though history was repeating itself. No wonder the dwarf and the dwarf liked each other so much. From the experiences of the heroes during the heroic era, it could be seen that during that era humans and gods lived together. There was frequent communication between gods and gods. The divine wars between gods were like the struggle for power between kings. Hence, after knowing that their daughter was abducted by Durin, the sea god and wind goddess didn't have the thought that gods shouldn't appear in the world. On the night of Durin and Yenne's wedding, the couple destroyed the Storm King's castle and killed all of Durin's relatives and guests. This was a blood feud. Durin and Yenne's union was not like Dong Yong and the Weaver Girl, or Lu Yenchong and the Third Holy Mother. Durin was a demigod. Before he met Yennefer, he had lived for 1,000 years. He had many women and had many children. He had many relatives. The sea god and wind goddess killed his entire family. What kind of feud was this? There were also guests. In Westeros, where the rights of guests were highly valued, not being able to protect the guests who gave their blessings to the couple was the greatest humiliation for a demigod king like Durin. Durin declared war on the god and wife. The divine wars that lasted for 100 years was how Durin forged the name God's Worry. The sea god raised raging waves and destroyed all the coastal castles. Huge storms wreaked havoc in Durin's kingdom, destroying cities, towns, and villages. The sea god and wind goddess massacred Durin's citizens and destroyed the kingdom's production and crops. However, the two true gods used forbidden spells to cleanse the land. They could only hurt Durin's kingdom, causing him more pain and hatred. They couldn't kill him. If it was just a divine wars, the children of the forest could still endure one or two forbidden spells. However, both sides were long-lived gods. Time meant nothing to them. They kept fighting for 100 years. The true gods left countless forbidden spells in the land of storms. The human cities and the forests of the children of the forest were all destroyed. The onlookers couldn't stand it anymore. The Green Prophet and the powerful human demigods joined the battle. The Windstop fortress that suppressed Broken Boat Bay was built with the blueprint provided by Brandon and the children of the forest in charge of enchantment. The wind goddess and the sea god had been fighting for a long time. They were already exhausted. The wind goddess also paid a huge price to fuse the opposing laws of the husband and wife shop. The half-blooded wind goddess was exhausted and had no divine power. It was like she was half-blooded and half-mana. However, she didn't just have to face the children of the forest who tried to stop the fight. She also had to face Wrath, who had ulterior motives. Wrath and Durin took the opportunity to harvest the wind goddess head. Wrath then used his powerful soul power to take over the true god's body. It could also be said that Wrath had swallowed the wind goddess. The true form of the wind goddess was a storm that gave birth to spirituality. She had a powerful and special wind element talent. Wrath's methods weren't rare. Some of the evil gods in the Justice Alliance were plotting against the Dragon Queen. They wanted to devour her special bloodline and obtain the chance to control the First Flame. This was the benefit of studying abroad. In the Westeros, he would never be able to learn such advanced blood witchcraft. I didn't want to kill the wind goddess back then. Fine, my heart was filled with anger and hatred. If I had the ability to kill a god, I would have done it. However, when Wrath asked me to attack the wind goddess, he only said that he would severely injure her so that she wouldn't dare to interfere with me and Yennefer. Who knew? You would be happy to see the end of the wind goddess, right? I saw you standing beside the corpse of the goddess of wind and laughing heartily. Dany said calmly. It was also karma. By occupying the wind goddess's wind and cloud divine body, Wrath quickly learned the Song of the Storm. Now, more than 10,000 years later, because the Dragon Queen didn't know that the tornado that was suspected to be the wind goddess' divine body was her true form, she still beat him to the brink of death even though she didn't want to kill him. Success was because of the wind and cloud, and failure was also because of the wind and cloud. Durin Crow said, "I have a reason to curse the sea god and the wind goddess in the most vicious way. My family, friends, and people of the kingdom were all slaughtered by them. Blood hatred can only be cleansed with blood. However, the wind goddess was also the mother of my wife, Yini. I wanted to hide the truth from her. But Wrath secretly told her that I murdered her mother. I couldn't even defend myself. All the more reason I have to kill Wrath. Even if he was a rare true god, even if killing him would accelerate the fall of the world, I don't care. I don't regret it." Durin's soul fluctuated fiercely, and his voice became sad and sad. "I used to respect him, believe in him, and love him. However, after the wind goddess died, he seemed to have changed into another person. He used the cruelest methods to torture me. He tempted Yini to take revenge on me, and he even involved my child. Yini and I turned from lovers to enemies. Our husband and wife killed each other. My child and brother killed each other. I accidentally killed Yini, and my son killed his own family. I hugged Yini's corpse and tears of blood flowed from my eyes. I cried in despair like a lone wolf, but he laughed in the clouds. Wrath is a madman. The pain of the most devout believer is the source of his happiness. He didn't target you. He hated all humans." Danny thought. Death couldn't end my sad life. He stuffed my soul into the crow's body, forcing me to be the slave of his enemy for eternity. I, the Storm King God Jiancho, was forced to be the enemy's slave. How humiliating it was. "Tell me, should I take revenge?" Durin cried. Although Durin's revenge was reasonable, Danny, who had seen his life in the river of time, didn't like him. She wanted to burn him into an elemental giant. All the followers of the God of Storm, without exception, had practiced the doctrine of the God of Storm all their lives. Burning, killing, looting, bringing destruction to the world, providing the God of Storm with the power of pain. In the end, they were tricked by the God of Storm to destroy themselves. Their souls entered the Cloud Hall and continued to provide joy to the God of Storm with their own pain. It was very tragic and sad, but some of them were also very talented and valuable. It was also because of them that Danny had the idea of creating the Wind Giants. As the priests of the God of Storm, their attributes were naturally compatible with the Song of the Storm. After hundreds of thousands of years of pain, their souls did not collapse, which was enough to prove the toughness of their souls. After personally experimenting with the souls of the priests of the God of Storm, Danny's guess was confirmed. After 10 days, she used the fire of creation to burn the Wind King and 200 warriors. Needless to say, the Wind King was Du Luan. He was originally a powerful demigod who had lived for tens of thousands of years. After being reincarnated as a wind giant, Danny returned all the divinity and spirituality that belonged to his previous life to him. It was not surprising that he could become the king of wind giants. The spread of the God of Storm's faith was not widespread. It was only prevalent in the Iron Islands, the Shield Islands, the Three Sisters Islands, and other island kingdoms. For more than 10,000 years, there were only a few thousand believers who were qualified to enter the hall in the clouds. But they did not enter heaven, but suffered in hell. Every minute and every second, they were cut into pieces by the wind blades in the storm cage. How could a normal person withstand it? Danny only found 2,000 souls of the priests of the God of Storm. Only 10% of the souls could withstand the burning of the fire of creation. The rest of the souls collapsed when they were burned and completely disappeared from the world. In other words, they completed the natural reincarnation. The king of wind giants was 100 meters tall. Its skin, muscles, and bones were made of wind. Its whole body was light blue and black. It looked simple and honest, with bulging muscles and a long tornado tail. Except for its bigger size, its appearance was almost exactly the same as the genie in Aladdin's magic lamp. The 200 warriors also looked like the genie in Aladdin's magic lamp. They were light blue and almost translucent. Not counting the tail, the shortest one was 3 meters, and the tallest one was no more than 5 meters. The strength of the wind giants was only 1/10 of the strength of the wind elves before they evolved, or even less. They were miserable and weak. What made Danny even more dissatisfied was that not only were the wind giants weak, but they also lacked the spirituality of the wind elves. They looked silly and slow, and did not even know how to call out Mother Danny. The smartest king of wind giants only looked at the dragon queen and smiled foolishly. Probably had the IQ of a normal person. The rest were too bad. They were simply mentally retarded. They did not understand the human language and could not differentiate between north and south. The dragon queen asked them to line up and count off. The mere 200 giants were actually huddled together. It was not easy for them to stand hand in hand under the scolding of the centaur maid. When they counted off, they only said 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This group of idiots can only count to 3? The dragon queen sighed. It's already not bad. Even newborn children don't know how to count. The plump and short Jichi said. Children still have the chance to grow brains, but they will never develop again. Danny hesitated. She did not know if she should destroy this group of newborn wind giants. If it was just that they were not smart, she could reluctantly accept it. But after 2 days, Danny realized that these wind giants did not have the intelligence of humans, but perfectly inherited the original sin of humans. Unlike the wind elves, who were pure and full of immortal aura, the wind giants were greedy and furious. In order to fight for the wind that contained the god of wind, they would fight with each other. They could not learn how to count no matter how hard they tried. They did not even need to be taught how to fight. Not only did the wind giants beat their own companions, they even tried to attack the humans when they found out that the 2 centaur maids, Jichi and Ili, had the same appearance but different strength as the dragon queen. Most of the time, their anger came without reason. After that, they even completed the division of ranks in an extremely short period of time through group fights. Underlings, big brothers, great commanders, the ranks were clearly defined. The strong bullied the weak, and the weak did not dare to resist. They were submissive and followed the orders of the strong, and then bullied the even weaker ones. The dragon has 9 sons, each different. They are all creatures created from fire, but the wind giants are not elves, they are more like beastmen. Danny understood. It could also be that the seed is not good. Bad bamboo shoots produce bad bamboo. The iron seed is already so evil. The storm god priest in the iron seed is even more. Can you imagine Yuluan being as kind as an elf? Bran said uncertainly. I want to destroy them. Danny said. You don't have to go to such extremes. Even a pile of mud can be used to paste a wall. 200 wind giants is enough to build a wall of wind. Bran advised. The reason why the wind giants and wind elves were differentiated was because of their different functions. While studying the ruins of the hall in the clouds, Danny suddenly had an idea. Could she build a replica of the hall in the clouds in the human world? The wall of wind in the hall in the clouds used the storm as a brick. It could crush the flesh and bones of the invaders and melt the enemy's spirit. Its defensive power was very strong, and it could form a layer similar to a vacuum. The insulation effect was especially good. If the wind giants were used as bricks, could Danny replicate the wall of wind and build a wind belt? In fact, she had a similar idea a long time ago, using the power of wind to build a giant thermos cup, and humans would live within the range of the thermos cup. Then, with a small sun hanging in the sky, could they survive the long night? Putting the wind giants aside, Danny looked at the god of wind giants who was about to be born. Using the method of wrath to seize the body of the wind goddess, the storm god could be counted as the second life of the green prophet. After squeezing out the divinity, spirituality, and the song of the law in the soul, only the life imprint of wrath and the wind goddess was left. Danny had tried to create a second life for the true god, a door god who was more powerful than the storm god. However, the door god's life imprint was barely a quarter of it. It was too broken and couldn't give birth to a complete life in the fire of creation. It could only merge the life imprint into the weirwood tree trunk. It wasn't a second life, but an incomplete reincarnation. The life imprint of the storm god was complete. Theoretically, it could also be burned into a wind elf. The reason why she left it for last was that the life imprint of the true god was too precious. Danny wanted to use other wind giants to practice. Phew, there were no obstacles at all. I succeeded so easily. It's 2 levels stronger than Duluan. Looking at the 100-meter-tall wind giant in front of her, Danny was very excited. Originally, it would be very difficult to burn a true god. However, The life imprint of the true God was so tough that it could burn without restraint. It only took an hour to burn it into a giant wind giant. I am the storm, I am the havoc, I am the great wind calamity. Outside the balcony of the drawing room, the wind giant was floating in the air. It opened its arms and roared angrily at the sky. The wind blew and clouds surged. Dragonstone Island was gradually surrounded by a giant tornado that was a few kilometers in diameter. The strong wind even created spiral-shaped water pillars on the sea surface. The magic crystal tower detected an unfamiliar strong divine power. When the wind giant was born, it sounded like a black girl on duty. Then, the whole Dragonstone Island was shocked by the natural phenomenon of the storm and the waterspout. The royal mages rushed to the magic crystal tower and formed a defensive magic circle. The Iron Warriors and the Dragonstone Island guards rushed to the tower where the queen was. It wasn't until Jichi ran to the gate and shouted, "This stupid wind giant is the queen's summoned pet." Half of the panic calmed down. Everyone gathered around the main hall and pointed at the majestic wind giant in amazement. Standing on the balcony and looking at the wind giant floating in the air, Danny had a strange expression on her face. After a while she said, "This guy is very strong and also very troublesome." As expected, bad bamboo shoots produce bad bamboo. "It's as troublesome as new Shao," she quickly added. "This is the power of creation," Bran exclaimed. "Even if it's not a true god, it's far stronger than a normal demigod. Your Majesty, try and see if you can give it the wind god's song of law. Maybe it can restore the wind god's position as a true god. At least it can be a fake true god like Balerion." Danny's eyes lit up. Good idea. Chapter 10:24. As long as a god died, the song of law they comprehended would begin to dissipate naturally, just like how a corpse would rot after death. Similar to how corpses could be stored in a freezer, there were only two places where the song of law could be stored. Either it was obtained by a true god, or it was placed in the god kingdom of a powerful god. At this moment, the storm god's song of storm had already disappeared by 1%. This 1% was lost in less than a minute when the storm god died and was exposed to the material world. In other words, if left alone, it would only take a few hours for a complete song of law to disappear. With a nervous heart, she carefully integrated 99% of the song of storm into the giant's soul core. The storm giant's ashes came from all directions and entered its body. The sea of law began to boil intensely. The surrounding sea shook, and Dragonstone Island shook like a wooden boat in a bathtub. It was as if the whole world was cheering loudly. How is this possible? A true god was born? At the edge of the world, at the border between the sea and the outer region, the flowing water palace was still brightly lit with stars. The Iron Seed and the mermaid were singing and drinking happily. Inami looked at Night Lion with her big eyes under her thick eyebrows, hoping to get an answer from him. Night Lion was also surprised and doubtful. "You have the status of a true god, so you should be more aware of the state of the world than I am. The sea of law is cheering, and the world is falling." Inami closed her eyes and thought carefully for a moment. Then she said, "It's like a sailboat sailing with the wind dropping a piece of sail. The falling momentum is not reversed, but the speed is slowing down." But at this point Inami's thick eyebrows gradually frowned, and she said with certainty, "But he's not a true god yet. If a true god is on the third floor, he's just very tall. When he jumped from the second floor, half of his body jumped to the third floor. But no matter how high he jumped, he would eventually fall. Furthermore, his song of law is only close to perfection and is not complete." Night Lion was puzzled. "Only Balerion and Danny Rise have the ability to jump. Balerion is pinned by us at the mouth of the volcano in the Smoke Sea Trench and can't move. Danny Rise's Song of Light should be more than 85% complete, but the waves in the Sea of Law are nothing like light and fire. Instead they look like..." After a pause, Night Lion said with a complicated expression, "If I wasn't sure that the god of storm was dead, I would have thought that he was playing some tricks." Inami's expression changed. She jumped out of the bathtub and floated in the air. She looked up at the shining stars in the sky. A few stars suddenly brightened, and in the next moment, a blurry image replaced the stars. It was a scene that happened on Dragonstone Island. It was as if someone was hiding at the bottom of the sea near Dragonstone Island, using a camera to spy on what was happening on Dragonstone Island. Your 5 seas map is really convenient. You can observe all the seas in the world anytime, anywhere. Looking at the video projection above his head, Night Lion was amazed. Compared to the three-eyed crow's omniscient eye, my 5 seas map is far inferior. Inami had a proud look on her face, but her words were very humble. I can only see it when I look at it. There are many areas that I can't see clearly even if I want to, such as Dragonstone Island, She glanced at Night Lion and said meaningfully, such as the Smoke Sea. Night Lion's expression didn't change at all. He just smiled and said, "Can it be clearer? That thing looks like wind and fog. I can't see it clearly." "Can't you see that it was made by Danny Rise?" Inami sneered. "Not to mention that she's on Dragonstone Island now. Even if she left, directly looking at it will alarm the Magic Crystal Tower." Although she said this, Inami still moved the camera closer. The image quality was really terrible. She couldn't even see the 100-meter-tall wind giant clearly. After a full 15 minutes, Night Lion was still looking at the image with a frown. Inami suddenly realized and shouted in shock, "Damn it, that's a mutant wind spirit. It's the second life of that bastard Storm. What, even a true god can create a second life?" Night Lion was shocked. Inami suppressed the shock in her heart and said with a serious expression, "It's hard to believe, but the first flame can even create a world. Danny Rise's creation of life in the fire wasn't created out of nothing. Storm died by her hands, so his soul and the Song of Laws must have become her spoils of war. Besides, Storm was originally a child of the forest. How many children of the forest has she created a second life for? It's too terrifying. This is almost the power of creation." Night Lion was shocked, but at the same time, the greed in his heart grew wildly. He looked at his old friend and said slowly, "For this kind of power, any price is worth it." For the first time, Inami didn't reject him immediately. However, she didn't show a look of desire like Night Lion. Instead, her face was gloomy and her heart was heavy. Night Lion was puzzled at first, but after thinking for a while, he smiled happily. Today she can create a storm giant. Tomorrow she wouldn't mind creating a sea giant. After all, the gods created by themselves are the most obedient. It's just a pity for the storm god. He was a true god, but he was reduced to a mortal's pet. Inami stared at the wind giant in the blurry image. Her eyes were cold, and the murderous intent in her eyes was like the gunk in the morning. It slowly condensed. She closed her eyes and said softly, "That giant isn't a true god yet." Even the Song of Storm isn't complete. Before she finished, the Sea of Laws boiled again. The world's reaction was even more intense than before. Almost everyone heard a violent song of wind. The world was singing. "This is the..." Inami and Night Lion both opened their eyes wide and murmured as if they were sleepwalking. "A true god's vision. This is clearly a vision of the world giving birth to a true god. How is this possible?" At this moment, everyone in the world, be it humans, gods, or demons who knew what was going on, were all shocked and confused. That's not right. The waves in the Sea of Laws have calmed down? 10 minutes later, Inami woke up from her shock and said in confusion, "But the true god's vision hasn't been completed yet." "Yes, he's not a true god yet." Night Lion reacted and said in surprise, "If a new true god is born, not only will the world broadcast his Song of Laws, but it will also grant him the status of a true god. The name of the true god will be branded in the core of the Sea of Laws, and the throne of the true god will rise in the astral world above the sky. There are no stars in the sky, and there are no signs of a god's name in the Sea of Laws." Inami nodded. Night Lion sighed. "But the storm giant isn't a normal demigod. He can sing the complete Song of Laws. Moreover, he was a true god in his previous life, and now he seems to have a connection with the storm god. He's lower than a true god, but his realm is higher than Beleriand's. Danny Leesy's skill is superb." Inami smiled bitterly. "It's brilliant. Danny Leesy can sing the highest level of the Song of Winds herself, and she has a deep understanding of the wind elemental law. In just half an hour, she helped the storm giant complete the incomplete Song of Winds. I've only seen similar skills from Old Devil. I suspect that her Song of Winds has exceeded 60%. He rubbed his face and said with a depressed expression, Back then, he purposely learned from the dark demon god and only sang the Song of Waves to 99% to avoid the responsibility of a true god. Old Fish had a dark smile on his face. He pointed a finger between his eyebrows, and suddenly, a large amount of knowledge of the water elemental law appeared in his mind. In just a moment, he was forced to have an epiphany and became a true god uncontrollably. Dragon Queen's performance today was amazing, but compared to Door God it was not impressive enough. After all, Dragon Queen was a wind god, but Door God was not a water god. She's been studying the Song of Winds for the past year. It's not surprising that she has such results. Night Lion forced a smile, but she's only been cultivating for a few years. Could it be that the inferior human race is the world's favorite? Inami looked at the countless iron seed drinking and having fun in the square below. She felt very uncomfortable. Night Lion said, talent is one thing, but it's mainly because she was born in a good era. When the era is changing, the comprehension of the law is more than 10 times easier than before. Especially as the child of the era, she's also favored by the will of the world. That's true. Inami sighed. She cancelled the water mirror on the dome and returned to the pool. She was silent with a gloomy face. To the world and to Danny Rise, the storm giant is good news. Its appearance stabilizes the sea of law and effectively slows down the fall of the world. But to us, especially you, it's a life and death crisis, Night Lion said faintly. You can create another sea giant by killing me? Inami glanced at him coldly. Look at the crows under her command. There are fire crows and wind crows, but are there any water crows? There aren't any today, but that doesn't mean there won't be any tomorrow. Plus, Inami has more than one law. Maybe she can turn you into a fire giant? A true god who has comprehended two opposing laws wouldn't be so naive as to place her fate on someone else's mercy, right? Plus, she's ruthless and has never been merciful. If you didn't feel fear from the death of the storm god, you wouldn't have gone back on your words and invited me into the flowing water palace again, right? Night Lion smiled. I let you in to find out how that bastard Storm died, Inami said in a low voice. Night Lion's right index finger moved slightly as he said slowly, no matter what Danny Rise did, Storm did use the wind cage on her. Ask yourself, is the flowing water palace more secretive than the hall in the clouds? Or is your physical body's defense stronger than a true god's elemental divine body? Inami shook her head helplessly and sighed. Maybe submitting to Danny Rise is the best choice. Are you serious? Night Lion was so shocked that his voice was distorted. You're a true god who has lived for almost 100,000 years. You're willing to be a dog for a human in her early 20s? Have you forgotten that just 10,000 years ago, the human race was just a sacrifice to us? I can't fight back. There's nothing I can do. Inami's eyes flashed as she pretended to be helpless. Night Lion's expression was firm as he said quickly, as long as you cooperate with us, I swear that Danny Rise will die. I don't believe you. Inami shook her head. Night Lion looked at her thoughtfully. She probably wanted to kill Dragon Queen, but she just wanted to confirm the Righteous Alliance's methods. With that in mind, he decided to take a risk. We're in the Smoke Sea. After hearing the Righteous Alliance's plan, Inami's eyes widened. She said in shock, you're using the fate of the entire world as a bargaining chip. You're so cruel, so vicious, so evil. If you're willing to join us, we can be even more vicious. Night Lion smiled encouragingly. Inami. Chapter 1025. Crabclaw Peninsula. Beside the bay, Horror Cave Fort on the cliff. Inside the cave sanctuary dug out of the mountain, Sir Eustace said with a frown, it's been 2 years, all the pine trees in the territory have been cut down. The cost of going further is too high, why don't we cross Crab Bay? Lord Bishop, do you think we should arrange for the volunteers to escort the sleigh team to the valley to borrow food? Marabad walked to the window at the edge of the cave and looked down at the messy land below the mountain. The once boundless sea of pine trees had disappeared without a trace, leaving only the black land covered in snow. Countless people had trampled on it countless times, the white snow stained with black muddy water, which then turned into dirty ice. The messy footprints were like pockmarks on one's face. The holes left behind after digging out the roots were like frostbites on the ground. Sigh, it's hard to imagine. When I first came, I still despised the dense pine forest and organized the refugees to burn down the forest show stronghold. Now, Merabat smiled bitterly and shook his head. When he first met the Dragon Queen, he still had a head of mottled gray hair, but now it had all turned silver. His 1.8 tall body was bent and hunched under the heavy burden of taking care of 1 million refugees. His body even seemed a little short now. Only the light in his eyes was brighter, firmer, and gentler than before. No matter how many pine trees there are, there's no way they can withstand so many people chewing on them. In the beginning, there were only refugees from Fujian and the king's territory, but when the long night came, the savages of Crabclaw Peninsula received the Dragon Queen's invitation and brought their families to join her. So far there are about 1.3 million people. If each person eats 1 tree, that's 1.3 million trees. It wouldn't be strange if the forest within a few hundred kilometers was eaten clean. The Baron of Horror Cave Fort said helplessly. When Merabat heard that, he couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't know before calculating, but after calculating he was shocked. In 2 years, 1 person would definitely eat more than 1 tree. If the forests of Crabclaw Peninsula were eaten clean, would the King's Landing be spared? After the long night, would there be any pine trees left in the 7 nations? Fortunately, the Dragon Queen prepared 200,000 tons of food in advance, and Little Sun helped to fish. Otherwise, how miserable would it be now? The old monk said slowly. We can borrow grain from the Vale, suggested Sir Eustace again. He explained, during the rebellion of the 4 princes, the valley had been storing food for the winter. Moreover, there were many mountains and forests in the valley. Because of the Dragon Queen's order of long night production, the vassals of the valley had not wasted any labor. This year, when they were cutting trees and collecting firewood, they had also accumulated tens of thousands of tons of bark flour. However, the valley had changed owners one after another, and the various lords had led their soldiers to the King's Landing to fight a civil war. Their disaster relief and anti-ghost work had been terrible, and the old, the weak, women and children had died in large numbers, which had greatly reduced the consumption of food. As a result, the food crisis index of the valley is the lowest among the 7 countries, and it has never been read. Brother Merabat paced back and forth in front of the window a few times and said helplessly, I know what you're saying, but you're also a veteran noble. You should understand some things better than I do. Sir Eustace was over 60 this year, and even his grandchildren had reached the age of wielding swords to kill deviant ghosts. In his early years, he had participated in the Battle of Ruby Beach with Riga, and had also served the Iron Throne during the War of the 4 Princes. Naturally, he understood the truth in the old friar's words. The Crabclaw Peninsula was the ancestral fief of the Targaryens. Whether or not the Dragon Queen eventually sat on the Iron Throne, this was an unchangeable fact. Just like the Northern Territory belonged to Stark, and the Western Territory belonged to Lannister. However, the vassals of the valley were serving the Iron Throne, and on the Iron Throne sat Stannis. During the Cold Disaster and Deviant Ghost Disaster, the valley lost millions of people, and a lot of food was left. However, the Crabclaw Peninsula lacked food, and the King's Landing was even more lacking. Erlu was now relying on the grain of the valley to win people's hearts. Actually, the vassals of the valley are all willing to pledge their loyalty to the Queen, he emphasized. The nobles of the valley, led by Bronze John, have long wanted to seek refuge with Her Majesty the Queen. Now that the Scholar's Book of Gods is circulating everywhere, everyone knows about Lalo's sinister intentions. Even the people of the King's Landing are spontaneously resisting the Red Priest and Stannis, and the vassals are even more unable to stand serving the enemy of the 7 gods. However, the Red Priest is indeed helping the Westeros clear out the deviant ghosts, and the food transported to the King's Landing has also been eaten by the people of the 7 kingdoms. Stannis has finally managed to keep the King's Landing and the royal territory in order. The night is long, and the main enemy of the humans will always be the deviant ghosts. When we have internal strife, the happiest ones will definitely be the God of Frost and the King of Deviant Ghosts, Merabat said in a low voice. Sir Eustace asked helplessly, Then how do we solve the food problem? Merabat pondered for a moment, then slowly said, Since the secret of the gods is no longer a secret, then I don't mind letting you know some information. The night will last for at least 10 years, But 2 years have passed, and the food reserves of the 7 kingdoms are almost empty. We need large amounts of food that cannot be obtained through conventional means, so we can only rely on supernatural powers. The surface area of the ocean is several times that of the land. Even without sunlight, most of the algae and fish in the ocean have died, but in the deep sea, there are still many giant sea creatures such as the sea monsters. Therefore, Her Majesty the Queen intends to form an alliance with the Anami, and then requested the god of the ocean to provide the humans with enough fish to last the entire world through the night. Even though Eustace had read the scholar's Book of Gods, he was still shocked by the Dragon Queen's generosity. Asking the gods to help the humans catch fish, how bold was that? Is the Anami willing? I heard that she has a bad temper. Just look at Ironseed's Song of the Anami's Bible, and you will know how cruel she is, he said worriedly. I went on a business trip to Monarch's Landing a few days ago. Guess who I met? Meribad laughed. Dragon Queen. As soon as he said this, the old knight immediately shook his head and laughed. The Dragon Queen is on Dragonstone Island. If you want to see her, just go to Dragonstone Island. The old monk did not keep them in suspense and said directly, I represented the Church of the 7 Gods to meet Asha Greyjoy, the Duke of the Iron Islands, and the drowned man Thale. On behalf of the Dragon Queen and the Church of the 7 Gods, I announce that the Ironseed's crimes against the Westeros are pardoned, and that the Greyjoy family's rule over the Iron Islands is acknowledged. At the same time, Asha will replace you, Lewin, as the official Duke of the Iron Islands. In return, Duke Asha and Priest Thale have promised to persuade Her Majesty Anami to accept the Queen's goodwill. The Dragon Queen was scared. She was greatly agitated by the incident with the God of Storms, and was afraid of the same reaction as the Anami. She would rather die than live in peace. Therefore, Dany did not immediately storm the Flowing Water Palace. At least she should be polite before using force. First, she would let her little brother communicate with the Anami's little brother, and explain the pros and cons. Then, she would provide an alliance contract that Dany thought was very reasonable, and allow Anami to bargain with her through the drowned man. Her Majesty the Queen wants to become brother and sister with Anami. The Queen will be the elder sister, and Anami will be the younger brother. Sister and brother will work together and spend the long night together, Monk Meribad said dryly. Anami is a true god that has existed for more than 10,000 years, right? Is it appropriate for her to be the younger brother? Eustace said in disbelief. Half a month ago there was a vision of heaven and earth crying. Do you still remember? That was the sign of a true god's fall. The Dragon Queen killed the disobedient god of storms with a single slash of her sword, Meribad said in a low voice. Holy Mother! Eustace's eyes widened. Are you kidding? I was shocked too, but that's the truth. The Queen also asked me to explain to the Anami's high priest that she was not an evil person. She only wanted to invite the God of Storms to join the alliance, but the God of Storms was bewitched by the righteous alliance and abandoned good to evil. Even so, Her Majesty the Queen still had a merciful heart. When she slashed down with her sword, she tried her best to avoid hitting his vitals. Her goal was to injure but not kill. However, the God of Storms was caught in the crossfire, and could not hold on any longer. He was on the verge of death, and then his servant, the ravens, attacked the main god. Meribad's expression was complicated. There was pride, shock, and a faint disdain for the God of Storms. The Queen hopes that Her Majesty Anami will not misunderstand, and will not be afraid, and will not do anything extreme. Even if the alliance does not work out, she will not act brazenly. This is really... Eustace's expression was even more complicated. His old face was twisted beyond recognition. Not even able to withstand a single slash? Meribad nodded. I think that although I'm a little old, I should be able to last 2 rounds in a duel with the Queen. Yes, the Queen, please don't use magic. Eustace's old face was slightly red, and he said somewhat embarrassedly. Looking at the old man with gray hair and heavy bags under his eyes, Meribad's mouth twitched. Believe me, you can't even draw your sword in front of Her Majesty, the old knight said unhappily. That year at Honeywine River, Sir Dickon Tarley also lasted a few rounds in front of Her Majesty. I've seen him in Maiden Spring City. He's a good lad, but his sword skills are not as strong as mine. He even asked me for advice on martial arts. Moreover, in the earlier tournament at Haluan Castle, I fought Prince Riga and lost in a single blow. Prince Riga should be stronger than Sir Dickon, right? Sai, how many years has that been? Marabad was helpless. It's only been 4 years. The old monk was stunned. It was really a little shocking. 4 years ago, the Dragon Queen was still sparring with mortals and could not win in a single blow. 4 years later, she could slash a true god with her sword. Do you think that gods fight like mortals using swords to cut each other? You just said that the queen killed the god of storms in a single blow. That blow, suddenly a dragon's roar came from the sky. The old monk was not in the mood to talk nonsense with the knight and immediately jogged out of the cave sanctuary. It was the White Knight Mormont. De Xiong brought a map and pointed to a plain near the river bend on Crabclaw Peninsula. Her Majesty wants to use this piece of land to test the shelter of holy light. Lord Bishop and Sir Eustace, please cooperate with me and complete the migration of 10,000 refugees in 2 days. What shelter of holy light? Marabad asked curiously. I'm not too sure. First choose 10,000 farmers who know how to farm and will know in a few days. The plain chosen by the Dragon Queen was not far from Terror Cave Castle. Before the long night, that was the main source of food for the Bren family. Including the low hills and the lake beside the fields, it was only 70 to 80 square kilometers. 10,000 able-bodied farmers, 300 volunteers, a dozen monks, including Marabad and Sir Eustace, watched as the Dragon Queen teleported to the sky above the campsite. She did not speak to them and directly took out a handful of green beans from her pocket. The green beans scattered down casually. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The beans were still in midair when they swelled into giant green-gray-skinned giants. Little children, hand in hand, walk one after another, form a circle like a ball, hand in hand little children. Under the stunned gazes of the crowd, 20 dull-looking giants sang a nursery rhyme. Hand in hand, formed a circle and then spun faster. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the wind rose. The giants' bodies swelled and merged together to form a green wind ring. Then the wind ring was like mud in the hands of a craftsman. The inner ring expanded and covered the plain with a radius of 5 kilometers. The wind ring rose up and down to the ground and 1,000 meters in the air before it gradually shrank. The giant's rhyme had disappeared and a translucent giant bowl was placed upside down above everyone's heads. The crowd was still confused when the Dragon Queen waved her hand again. The sky was bright and a sun the size of a water tank hung in the sky. Chapter 1026. The world of the Song of Ice and Fire had many bugged buildings. The Iron Islands Greyjoy family's castle, Pike City, was one of the bugged buildings. When it was first built, Pike City was located at the top of a cliff that protruded from the sea. As time passed, the rocks that supported the cliff were eroded by the sea breeze and waves. The island gradually became a reef surrounded by seawater. It was like a peanut ice cream placed on the balcony and exposed to the scorching summer sun. The cream and chocolate melted and flowed along the wall, leaving only the peanuts behind. The architect who built Pike City seemed to be able to predict the future of the castle. When he built the city, he purposely built the castle's towers on the peanut ice cream. Just like that, the buildings that were originally connected together became a group of buildings isolated on the reef. The towers were connected by wooden bridges that swayed in the wind. Why was King Balan's death so easily accepted by the Iron Seed? Think about it. After having dinner in the dining hall, you decided to read a book for a while. So, you carried a lantern and crossed the spiral staircase that was hundreds of meters above sea level. It was not the stone tower that was hundreds of meters high, but the foundation of the tower was the cliff that was hundreds of meters above sea level. Then you went back to your bedroom to sleep. Again you crossed the rope bridge that was like a swing. When you woke up the next day, you heard that you had guests. Then you crossed, even if the probability of an accident every time you crossed the bridge was 0.001%. If you did it too many times you would fall down one day. Yes, there were as many Greyjoy who fell to his death in the storm as there were Targaryens who went crazy and tortured themselves to death. More importantly, even the promontory had become a reef under the erosion of time. The stone towers built on the promontory were still intact. At least, Asha slept in the Duke's bedroom called the Sea Tower. She listened to the raging waves outside and felt exceptionally peaceful. She was not worried at all that her castle would collapse in the storm. Of course, her peace was not only because of the sturdy castle. The past month was the most comfortable she had been in years. She was needed by the Dragon Queen and the Seven Kingdoms. Asha did not lack love. The Dragon Queen did not give her love. However, Yuluan's actions made Greyjoy, who had a bad reputation, become an existence hated by all. When the people of the Seven Kingdoms hated the other ghosts, they did not mind leaving a place of hatred for Yuluan and Iron Seed in their hearts. Therefore, even though Asha had become the de facto ruler of the Iron Islands more than a year ago, she was still not confident. She was worried that the Iron Seed and Greyjoy would be abandoned by the Westeros. Don't doubt it, Dragon Queen really did reveal her intention to completely ban Iron Seed. In the history of Westeros for 10,000 years, the Iron Islands had been trying to prove one thing. The Iron Seed was harmful to Westeros and not beneficial at all. Because of their disastrous defeat in the War of the Conquerors, Harrenburg, burned by the Megalosaurus, belonged to the King of the Iron Isles. The Iron Seed barely managed to keep quiet for 300 years when the Targaryens ruled the Westeros. The so-called quiet was only compared to the unscrupulous before the War of Conquest. The Iron Seed had always sent fleets to the Narrow Sea as pirates, and whenever they had the chance, they would also plunder the coasts of the Westeros. At one point, with the preferential customs policies given by the Iron Throne and the wise duke he had met, the Iron Seed had also made a fortune through sea trade. They did not need to plunder to live a prosperous life, and the Greyjoy family had accumulated a great deal of wealth. According to normal people's thinking, now that life was good, they should live a good life, right? But the Iron Seed did not. They thought, fuck, after holding back for so long, we're finally rich now. We have money to build warships, buy arms, ironware, and an armed force. Why don't we go all out? Then they really started to rebel, killing, robbing, and laughing. Therefore, the Dragon Queen had never thought of letting the Iron Seed live a good life, and then let them know their manners, and let them know their honor and disgrace when they have enough food and clothing. To the Iron Seed, living an honest life was a humiliation, and seizing, burning, killing, and plundering were the honorable ones. In a sense, they had really achieved knowing their honor and disgrace when they have enough food and clothing. For such a people, Dany's way of governing was very simple. She would completely ban them, including their economy, people's livelihood, external communications, and other social factors. The Iron Islands were an archipelago, and even the wood used to build ships had to be imported from the mainland. Cloth, wine, fine iron, and other resources were scarce. Faced with the ban, they could barely make ends meet, and their population could not grow. They had lost the potential for war, so how could they have the strength to provoke the major port cities? Now everything was fine. The Dragon Queen had personally promised that as long as they helped her honestly, regardless of whether they succeeded or not, she would give the Iron Seed another chance to be a good person. With the internal and external troubles eliminated, Asha was relieved and slept more soundly. The pterosaur's cry woke the Iron Islands Duchess from her deep sleep. She opened her eyes in a daze, and after confirming that there was indeed a pterosaur, she immediately woke up. She lifted the duvet and pushed away the man who was wrapped around her like a vine. She walked out of the bed naked, and the cold air that assaulted her made her shiver. Perhaps I should move to the castle and build a brick bed, Asha muttered to herself as she pulled the bedsheet to wipe the wet stains on her thighs. Duchess, so early? The man on the bed also woke up from his dream. With the dim yellow light of the whale oil lamp, Asha could see the face of her bedmate. Fortunately, it was her bodyguard, Big Dick. He was young, strong, and had a passable appearance. She originally had 7 or 8 bedmates, but the past few years were not peaceful. When she was captured by Erlu in Deep Forest Castle, 3 died in battle. The rest responded to Yolen of Scylla's summons. They either died in the river or were fighting the other ghosts in the High Court. A pterosaur knight has arrived. It should be Dragon Queen's men, she said casually and called for a maid to dress herself. The visitor was the second son of Crab Island, Riga Sitiga. The little crab originally did not have the qualifications to become a pterosaur knight. Later on, the old crab felt that he was too old and did not have the energy to ride a dragon into battle. He discussed with the Dragon Queen and gave his pterosaur to his second son. Yes, the big crab Eris Sitiga was the commander of the Slave Bay fleet. He already had a pterosaur. Although the little crab was greedy, he had a good resume in the past few years. In the early years, he helped Meribad build a stronghold, helped the Dragon Queen manage disaster relief on the Crabclaw Peninsula, participated in the Battle of Winterfell, and was the first to respond to the Dawn Knight summons. Hence, Dany agreed to the old crab's request. Duchess Asha, I know you like to read. This time, I have brought you a full set of hardcover editions of Wargrave's theatrical works. When he saw Asha in the main hall of the castle, the little crab attentively presented her with a large bundle of books wrapped in craft paper. Then he carried a bamboo basket of fresh strawberries. Eat more fruit, it will make you more beautiful. Asha smiled politely but not too intimately. Sir Sitiga, is there any other arrangement for you to come to the Iron Islands this time? She knew what the little crab was thinking. The Iron Islands' royal husband. However, it was not the first time they met. Back then, he despised her. The little crab had his connections and knew that the Dragon Queen wanted to ban the Iron Islands. It was only when the Dragon Queen promised to give the Iron Islands and Greyjoy another chance that he suddenly became very attentive to her. She looked down on such a snobbish fellow. Asha's calm reaction disappointed the little crab, but he did not forget his mission. I wonder if Her Majesty Anami agrees with the Queen's suggestion? Asha turned her gaze to triple-drowned man Thale. The Anami High Priest shook his head regretfully. Her Majesty Anami did not respond. She probably rejected it. Asha looked at the little crab worriedly. As expected, the little crab frowned and his tone became stern. The terms of the alliance can be discussed. Her Majesty Anami is not even willing to discuss it? Perhaps she is still thinking. Give us some time to explain the current situation to Her Majesty Anami, Asha said. Thale sighed and nodded. I will do my best. He personally did not agree with the Queen's alliance. To make the Iron Seed's supreme god the younger brother of a mortal? That was blasphemy. If it was another time in person, he would have shouted the slogan, "The dead will not die, and will rise again." He would have called for the Iron Seed to rebel and let the blasphemers feel pain and death. But now, to rebel against the Dragon Queen, that was, "The dead will die, there is no hope of rising again, the Anami will die, and the Iron Seed will be extinct. There is one more thing for this trip to the Iron Islands." The little crab's expression softened. Her Majesty has built the first holy light shelter on the Crabclaw Peninsula. Duke Asha and High Priest Thale can go and take a look. What is the holy light shelter for? Asha was puzzled. After you go, you will understand that the future of humanity depends on Her Majesty Dany Rise. No matter if the long night lasts for 10 years, 20 years, or even longer, the final victor is destined to be the humans. It is us, it is Her Majesty. The little crab said meaningfully. Half a day later, Asha understood what he meant. Am I dreaming? The sun was shining above her head, and there were bare-chested farmers working in the fields. The black soil was dotted with green spores, and the grass on the ridge had green leaves. The water in the ditch was gurgling, and the warm breeze brought the fragrance of spring and the cheerful singing of birds. When Asha was 10 years old, she had seen a similar scene. It was after winter and before summer. For people now it was spring that was very far away. But now it was the long night. She suspected that she had gone back in time. But she clearly remembered that a few minutes ago, she saw a huge inverted translucent bowl on the ground on the pterosaur's back. Liga sang a song loudly, "Little kid, hand in hand." Then a silly human face appeared on the wall of the bowl. It was huge and it grinned. The 30-meter-long pterosaur went into the giant's open mouth. The wall of the bowl seemed thin, but Asha flew in it for a minute. Maybe it was not a straight line? It was an ocean of wind with 2 layers. The outer layer was spiraling, and the inner layer was spiraling. When she flew through the middle layer, Asha had difficulty breathing and her face turned red. So she was not dreaming, nor did she go back in time. She just went through the wall of the wind bowl and came to the shelter of holy light. We call it the Dany Lilith Girdle. It is the land of eternal summer that Her Majesty personally created. Even in the long night, it is still summer here, early summer. Monk Meribad walked over. Currently, the Dany Lilith Girdle is still in the experimental stage. As long as it is proven to be feasible, it can be widely spread. 1,000 wind elves, 200 wind giants, the king of wind giants, and storm giants can create at least 3 super wind rings that cover the 3-river basin. 3 river basins? Half of the Westeros. Asha and Thale exclaimed. It's not an exaggeration. There are only 20 wind giants here, and they are not as strong as the wind elves. Moreover, the queen has storm giants that are not weaker than ordinary true gods. One of them can protect the 3-river basin, said the old monk. Gods bless, humans are saved. Asha exclaimed. Humans will win, but to save more lives we still have to solve a big problem. Meribad looked at Priest Thale and said seriously, if the wind elves are used to create the Dany Lilith girdle, Her Majesty will lose her powerful magic weapon. Next, what should we use to deal with the Frost God and the Evil God Alliance? If Her Majesty is exhausted when rescuing the city of Ursos, and the Evil God Alliance ambushes her, what should we do? So, Her Majesty needs help to deal with the Evil God Alliance first, then she can deal with the other ghosts without any worries. Also, there are too many humans, and the Girdle of Wind can't feed everyone. We need Her Majesty Anami to give us seafood to survive. Asha thought for a moment and said, with the Dany Lilith girdle, humans will definitely survive the long night. Her Majesty Anami's choice is just icing on the cake for humans. I think she will not refuse to ally with the victors. If she refused, she did not mind leading the Iron Seed to convert to the 7 gods. What value was there in a god who refused to help his believers out of a hopeless situation? I will try my best, Priest Thale said seriously. Chapter 10:27. Dany felt that she had done everything she could for Anami. Afraid of angering her, she gave up on the plan to break into the Flowing Water Palace. She waited until a week after the incident in the Cloud Hall before inviting Anami to a meeting to explain what happened to the Storm God. She explained that although she had the ability to kill a true god, she wasn't crazy enough to do so. Also, she didn't kill the Storm God. She only beat him to a pulp, and then his own followers turned on their master. She couldn't do anything about it. The first core rule of the game of power was that the player must always stand with the winner. The conflict between Dany and the Justice Alliance could be considered a game of power between the gods, a game of world domination. In order to let Anami understand how good the future was if she chose to side with her, she even invited Asha and Anami to visit the Cloud Hall, which was what Meribad and the others called Dany's ribbons. Dany called it a thermostat bowl. Obviously, as long as the Dragon Queen could make up her mind and get a large thermostat bowl in the Westeros and Slaver's Bay, she would definitely win. If the enemy attacked, she would have the home advantage. If the enemy didn't come, she would ignore the outside world and let the Justice Alliance do whatever they wanted. 10 years, 20 years, or even 200 years. One day, she would be able to sing the complete Song of Fire, Song of Wind, Song of Light, and even other songs of laws. She, who had mastered several basic songs of elemental laws, couldn't she easily dominate? As long as Dany could bear to give up on Ursos and 80% of the survivors of the Jade Sea and hold her ground, she was destined to be the final victor. Since she was bound to become the king of the gods, Inami could still get credit for helping her become the king of the gods. Why not? Of course, if Inami was willing to be her follower, she would be more than just helping her become the king of the gods. With Inami's help, the human food problem could be solved in one day. After that, she would be able to take Inami with her when there was another zombie plague in Ursos. As her vassal god, Inami could borrow the power of her first flame. In addition, she could also sing the chorus of the Song of Fire. With her own strength, she could easily quell the tide of zombies. Even if she was exhausted, Dany would be there to support her. If the Frost God dared to come, they would fight 2 against 1. With the help of the Megalosaurus and the Storm Giant, they would probably be able to defeat the Frost God. If the Righteous Alliance dared to launch a sneak attack, she had spatial magic and could support the Mermaid clan at any time. No matter how many evil gods came, they would not be able to survive. Such a beautiful future made Dany excited. Even if Inami continued to hide, she would not care about her. But when the day came when she ascended the throne of the King of Gods, would she continue to ignore her? At that time, could he resist? Would she care about his resistance? Therefore, in Dany's opinion, since she had already shown her kindness, Inami had no reason to reject her. However, the reply she was waiting for did not come. The person she was waiting for did not understand that if the wind was not blowing and the waves were not calm, she would not be able to stay calm. Just as Dani was about to go to the Iron Islands herself, King Kong sent her a request for help through the faith line. In fact, ever since they contacted each other more than a month ago, King Kong would cry for help every now and then. But Dani did not want to save it. She needed it to take the risk and attack the Frost God. But King Kong had been stubbornly refusing to agree. Just follow those ice gods. Dani was a little tired. She tried to persuade it and then projected herself tens of thousands of miles away. Then she was stunned. The night was cold and dark. The tropical rainforest was like a rice stalk rotting in the autumn, lying on the ground and covered with a layer of snow. The gray forest that had lost its green color. The white snow, the black soil. The vast land was endless, vast and desolate. The skeleton-like chimpanzee ran hard on all fours, crushing the decaying trees with its palms and feet, leaving footprints as big as buses in the snow. It exerted all its strength, and its fleshy palms brought up white ice crystals, gray decaying leaves, and black mud on the ground that was frozen hard. Rumble. In the boundless grayish-white snow forest, a black little mud ball hopped and hopped forward pathetically. Behind King Kong, 17 or 18 pterosaurs with blue eyes were following it from a distance. On the backs of the pterosaurs, there were ice crystal spears that were 4 to 5 meters long that were projected by the ice evil god. A small part of those evil gods were humanoid creatures with the characteristics of beasts and insects, and the rest were pig-faced people with striped skin. Those Sosros natives were not so much gods, but priests blessed by the frost god's divine power. Dani was only surprised for a moment before she understood. The pig-faced natives followed the law of the jungle and had no moral integrity. For example, the high priest of the spider demons, when he first saw Dani and Blackie, he took the initiative to cripple himself and his tribesmen as a blood sacrifice. Later, he joined King Kong and became its chief priest. If the frost god was willing to descend a little, the transcendent priests of the tribe would immediately offer their most devout faith. If Sosro's army of evil gods enters the continent of Ursos, Dani's expression was solemn. Whoosh, the sharp whistling of the air woke her up. She looked up and saw that the ice Quetzalcoatlus was gradually approaching King Kong. The gorilla suddenly turned over while running and picked up a tree trunk as thick as an adult's waist from the ground. While its body was still floating in the air, it suddenly threw the javelin in its hand with its face up and back down. Boom crash. The javelin made an ear-piercing sound as King Kong's back slammed into the snow forest. Under the effect of inertia, it slid 70 to 80 meters on the thick snow. The snow on the ground was cut open, and a shallow trench was plowed in the black soil. Dani felt her teeth ache just looking at it. King Kong, on the other hand, turned around and continued running as if nothing had happened. Kaboom! Only then did the sound of the tree trunk hitting its target was heard. A 20-meter-long striped pterosaur was pierced through the chest by a 15-meter-long tree trunk. It was like a high-speed pencil piercing through a sparrow's body. The cicada evil god on the pterosaur's back didn't have time to escape. Half of its body was torn apart. It hung on the tree trunk and screamed in pain. Boom boom. The pterosaur fell to the ground with a cry, creating a big hole in the snow. The tree trunk that was 200 meters high in the air crashed down, creating a deep hole. The evil god's wings and body were torn apart, leaving a pool of icy blue blood on the ground. After the attack, the rest of the ice pterosaurs hesitated and slowed down. King Kong sped up and turned into a small black dot, hopping and hopping at the end of the snowy land. Shit, King Kong's strength is more than 10 times stronger than it was 2 years ago. Dani was shocked. When they first met, the gorilla used a tree stump to attack Dahe. At that time, the tree trunk spear was fierce and looked scary, but in fact, its speed and strength were not enough. Like an ordinary person dodging a frisbee, Dahe easily avoided the attack and launched a counterattack. But now, both the ice pterosaur and the evil god saw the tree trunk, but they didn't have time to adjust because its strength was too great and its speed was too fast. After the shock, Dani entered King Kong's mind to take a closer look. She wouldn't have known if she didn't see it, but after seeing it, she understood why Frost God was so obsessed with this guy. You have a bit of a protagonist's life. This journey of escape was a crisis, but it was also a form of training. A month ago, King Kong's Song of Power rune was just a rune, but it was more complex and complete. He could barely be considered a demigod. Only a month later, the Song of Power rune showed signs of evolving into the Song of Laws. Danny exclaimed. Roar! King Kong roared in grievance. It didn't want to be the protagonist. It just wanted to go home and sleep. Danny began to hesitate. Should she suspend the plan of borrowing strength from the meat boat and let King Kong be the protagonist for a while to see if the Song of Power could start? But then she shook her head. Her spiritual projection stood at the back of King Kong's neck. It was blocked by the fluffy black and gold hair, but she could feel that there was something under her feet. King Kong was so thin that it didn't have much flesh on its body. It was only supported by its skeleton. If she let it continue to escape, the protagonist would also become cannon fodder. She pinched little King Kong hard, the soul fragment that was split from King Kong's body. Ow! King Kong, who was running at high speed, fell down, plowing a long trail on the ground. It hugged its head and rolled on the snow, howling. Sigh, it's better to get the pain over with than to prolong the pain. Don't worry, it will be over soon. Facing the tear-filled eyes of King Kong, Danny turned her head and turned into a stream of light, hiding in the depths of King Kong's soul core. The evil god of frost is coming. Don't let the cat out of the bag. Pretend that you're tired and your leg is cramping because of overexertion, she reminded. There was no need to pretend. The gorilla had already sprained its ankle when it fell down without warning while running at high speed. A moment later, 18 ice-winged dragons surrounded King Kong. Well, the winged dragon that was pierced through earlier was also here. It was a zombie and wasn't afraid of ordinary physical attacks. But the evil god of Cicada's torn body was frozen. Its breath was weak and it was in a terrible state. Roar! King Kong fell to the ground, hugging its right leg and howling. I surrender, I admit defeat. It sent out a spiritual wave, then held the back of its head with both hands and knelt on the ground. It was so obedient that it looked like an African American who was being pointed at by a white police officer with a gun. 10 pig-faced priests descended from the sky and approached King Kong carefully. When they saw that it did not attack, they formed a circle and chanted an ancient sacrificial song in a strange tone. Boom ka ka ka. Huge ice blue runes appeared under the feet of the priests. The 10 priests formed a huge 10-pointed star with King Kong in the center. Icicles rose from the priests one after another and touched King Kong. The icicles were as thick as a wrist and were ice blue. They were made of the same material as the deviant ghost ice sword, but they were as flexible as hemp rope. The 10 icicles wrapped tightly around King Kong's limbs, neck, waist, and hips. Then a visible layer of ice climbed up King Kong's body. King Kong begged for mercy, but endless ice power fell from the sky and landed on its fur and the icicle chains that it struggled to break free from. The sound of ice chips colliding with each other became sparse. King Kong was completely frozen. Where King Kong used to be, only a huge ice crystal grave was left. Through the translucent layer of ice, one could see King Kong frozen in ice. It was like a huge piece of amber. Almighty Lord, descend. The 10 wild boar priests tore off their animal skin vests and looked at the sky fervently. Blue light flashed in their hands and an ice dagger appeared. They swung it down and cut open their own chests. Bam bam bam. The dark gray heart beat vigorously. The protruding blood vessels shone with an ice blue light. Welcome, Lord. The wild boar priests let out their last cry. Their hearts beat at an overclocked rate. Then with a boom, they turned into ice powder. The priest's divine power, soul, and bloodline were all sucked dry. The huge power of blood sacrifice surged into the sky above the grave. A jagged space door slowly cracked open. The tentacles that looked like white snakes pierced through the void and fell from the space door. They snaked down and landed on the grave. They pierced through the ice like awls and into King Kong's 7 orifices and organs. Those were the roots of the weirwood. Welcome, Lord. The 8 evil gods who were still alive knelt and shouted. The frost god's main body had descended. Chapter 1028. When she first met King Kong, Danny cut off the head of King Kong's soul with a sword. After that, the incomplete soul had been sealed in the space of faith. It was Danny's method of controlling, locating, and punishing King Kong. Now that she wants King Kong to borrow the power of the meat boat, Dani certainly can't let it face Frost God with an incomplete soul. Frost God is not stupid. He found that King Kong's soul is incomplete, and there are traces of summoning beast runes in the gap. How can he not think that it has a master? Dani wants to hide a sword in the fish belly, but she won't let King Kong face Frost God alone. So where is she hiding? She is hiding in the soul fragment that was returned to King Kong. When she cut off a large piece of King Kong's soul fragment, she also healed it on the spot through spiritual bestowment. Over the years, Dani has also used her own spiritual essence to bestow spiritual essence to the soul fragment countless times. Unless she deliberately excludes the type of spiritual essence, for example, the saint healing technique only involves type E active spiritual essence. Generally, as long as she bestows spiritual essence, the soul will be stained with her aura. Type of spiritual essence specifically affects the will. Up to now, King Kong's original soul has long been contaminated by the spiritual essence she bestowed. Dani is hidden in it like a non-GMO bean hidden in a pile of GMOs. As powerful as Frost God is, he can't detect the abnormality in King Kong's soul core. He didn't find the trap, so he really came. His main body came. A dark crack opened in the sky, and white snake-like roots of the weirwood fell down. There were too many of them, like a truck of cleaned pig intestines, pouring down from the space. It seemed chaotic, but it fell on the ice crystal grave in an extremely orderly manner. The solid ice crystal that made King Kong unable to struggle was like air in front of the roots. Without any hindrance, the roots of the weirwood that looked like pig intestines but were as flexible as white snakes penetrated the grave, into King Kong's 7 orifices, into its skin, deep into its blood vessels, bones, and internal organs. Child, don't be afraid, I won't hurt you. Accept the power from your mother, and you will start a new life in a new world. A gentle, kind, and powerful voice sounded in King Kong's mind. Like a loving father. King Kong's tense body and spirit relaxed at once. A huge blue power followed the roots and entered King Kong's body. Within the Vajra and Vajra soul cores, Dani could vaguely hear an ethereal singing voice. It sounded like the soft moans of a mother beside a baby's cradle. King Kong, who had already fallen into a daze, had almost no power to resist and had completely fallen. Dani, however, was the exact opposite. The wisp of willpower hidden within the Vajra soul core was like a glass window that had been washed clean by water. It was unprecedentedly clear and transparent. She felt as if she had returned to, just like when she first met the door god inside the Great Wall, the door god sang a song of wind to her. This is the door god's method. The door god sang the song of wind and turned the sleeping child of the forest into the first green prophet. The frost god sang the song of ice and turned powerful demigods into his followers. Dani suddenly understood. So this is how the evil god of ice was transformed. Actually, she had guessed wrongly. The frost god had 2 methods of transforming evil gods. He would only chant the song of ice to living beings with potential. For cannon fodder without potential, he would not even descend with his true body. Just a wisp of willpower would annihilate the original divinity and spirit, and crudely transform them into ice creatures. For example, the butterfly god of the Nas people. There was no time to think. Dani knew that this was a rare opportunity. She immediately emptied her mind and allowed herself to be completely immersed in the song of ice. Emptiness, coldness, nothingness, desolation, loneliness. Her heart felt as if it had been soaked in a frozen lake in the North Pole for billions of years. She was also like a corpse with consciousness, floating in the empty and cold universe. The nearest star was also infinitely far away from her. She was alone like a ferocious beast, gnawing on a huge hole in her soul core that could never be filled. The ice turned into blue blood and flowed into her dried blood vessels. When she opened her eyes, everything before her was ice blue. Bam! In the center of her ice blue eyeball, a flame suddenly exploded. The song of ice and fire played at the same time. Time and space stretched infinitely before Dani's eyes. She seemed to have passed through a strange space-time tunnel and arrived at the core of the universe in an instant. There, countless worlds were falling and rising. Countless worlds were being destroyed in ice and countless worlds were being born in fire. All the secrets of the world were laid bare before her eyes. She felt an itch in her heart. She wanted to blow and ignite a new world in the void. Perhaps she could take away all the heat and fire of the old world with a breath. Her soul was elevated infinitely. She could not help but want to howl at the sky. Fuck. A strong sense of disharmony woke Danny up from the illusion. Upon closer inspection, Vajra was already enveloped in blue light. The powerful ice divine power condensed strange runes in his cells. The ice runes that represented the Song of Ice. The ice runes combined with the ice divine power and Vajra's original bloodline power formed a brand new gene, the ice bloodline. Ice Vajra was just born. His black gold hair lost its color and became translucent like ice whiskers. His body lost its temperature, but his heartbeat became stronger and more powerful. His dark red blood vessels turned icy blue, and deep blue icy blood flowed within them. His golden bones, which had been modified by the runes of the Vajra Song of Power, were dyed mottled blue, and icy blue bone marrow flowed within his spine. Its soul was also dyed ice blue. Its sea of consciousness was like a dome of ice under the aurora borealis. Danny understood where the disharmony came from. Just as she was immersed in the Song of Ice and even comprehended the Song of Ice and Fire for the first time, Vajra was eroded by Frost God's power. The transformation was almost complete. If Vajra's soul was completely transformed from a genetically modified soybean to a mung bean, then her non-genetically modified soybean would not be able to hide. In Vajra's sea of consciousness, Danny no longer hid. A huge amount of soul power poured in from Dragonstone Island. The will grew rapidly. The soybean sprouted and grew into a towering tree. In between the eyebrows of Vajra's soul core, the figure of Dragon Queen appeared. It was a bit like Sasuke Uchiha Susanoo. Frost God was shocked. The Song of Ice stopped abruptly. Vajra is my pet. Thank you for your reward. Also, your Song of Ice is amazing. I seem to have understood something. Danny grinned, and an orange flame ignited in her eyes. She held a flame in each of her palms, then squatted down, turned her palms, and pressed the flame on the ground on Vajra's soul core. Gift of the first flame. Boom! Vajra's soul, which had already been dyed ice blue, was instantly covered by the orange flame. Vajra's soul was like a sauna. A large amount of ice blue substance spurted out of the pores of its soul, trying to escape into nothingness. But once it came into contact with the orange flame, it was immediately ignited and burned into a powerful spirit and divinity. And this was just the beginning. The flame burned Vajra's soul. Then from the inside out, it ignited all the soul power that belonged to Frost God in Vajra's bones, blood vessels, muscles, and fur. Even Frost God's main body, the root of the weirwood that hung down from the void, was burned to ashes in the flame. Frost God was shocked and angry. This is impossible. My soul has been before he could finish his sentence. His divine body, which had reached into the material world, was burned to ashes. From the outside, it looked like the ice crystal grave and the white tree trunk that covered Vajra's body were suddenly covered in fire and then quickly burned to nothingness. Not even ashes were left. Bitch, how dare you trick me? Frost God's angry roar came from the crack in the void. More weirwood roots, carrying an even greater power, shot towards Vajra like ice spears. The surrounding ice evil gods also sensed the change in the situation. They either pulled out their ice swords and rushed toward Vajra, or released dark and bloody evil divine spells from afar. Roar! The impurities in Vajra's soul were washed away by the gift of spirit. Vajra opened his eyes and was revived. His body was bathed in fire, but 7 to 8 meters long ice sword fingernails grew out of his fingers. The surface of the ice sword fingernails was also covered with a layer of fire. Vajra rolled and dodged many attacks. At the same time, he swung his hand violently. Whoosh! The ice sword fingernails shot out like arrows. Although they were as fast as lightning, they only brought about a slight wind sound in the air. Tsk, tsk, tsk. 10 fingers, 10 ice swords, and 5 evil gods were hit. They were immediately pierced by the huge ice sword or cut into pieces. The remaining few were like sparrows startled by the bow of a bow and ran far away. This time it was not a physical attack like the tree spears. The evil gods' corpses were sealed in ice by the ice swords, but inside the ice, there was a raging fire. It was very strange. Roar! After a successful attack, Vajra somersaulted and stood up. He hammered his chest with his fists. The sound was like a drum beating, and the snow on the treetops rustled and fell. Then he squatted down and stomped on the ground. Large pieces of ice and black soil exploded from the ground. Vajra was like a heavy tank driving at the speed of an F1 car. With an unstoppable momentum, he pounced on the weirwood roots hanging from the crack in the void. Frost God snorted. Darkness descended without warning. Vajra's vision was pitch black. He completely lost his sense of direction and balance. With a plop, he tripped over himself and fell miserably. Light! Dragon Queen's voice fell. Vajra's ice-blue eyes immediately shone with a golden light, just like Sun Wukong, who had activated the fiery golden eyes. The golden light shot into the bulldozer ruins like the lightsaber of a Jedi warrior, splitting the dark sky with one slash. Roar! Vajra found the weirwood roots again and pounced on them. His huge body hung on them. Bastard, you're courting death. Frost God sneered. He did not dodge, but the weirwood roots were dyed gray. They were filled with the power of decay and death. Crackle! Where the roots whipped, Vajra's tough and fresh flesh was like rotten flesh that had been dead for 10 days in summer. Oh! Vajra wailed. But the extreme pain also made him ferocious. The power of ice and fire surged, covering his body with 2 layers of ice and fire armor. At the same time, he activated the runes of the Song of Power and used both hands to pull at the weirwood roots. Whip after whip, his muscles rotted and his bones broke. One after another, they were torn apart and set ablaze. Frost God and Vajra were like 2 savage beasts, engaging in the most primitive physical battle. It was a battle of health. Vajra, you're the best. Danny cheered for Vajra from the side. Bastard, bastard. Frost God cursed, but it was to no avail. However, Frost God was still full of energy and did not show any signs of weakness. Danny could not help but be alert. Suddenly she thought of something. Door God's roots could cover the entire Westeros and even beyond the Great Wall. Vajra's battle was very hot-blooded, but it seemed like it was only enough to tickle Frost God. The injuries on its body were real, and it would not be able to recover in a short time. If she did not cheat, Vajra would definitely lose. Thinking of this, Danny helped Vajra cheat without any qualms. Door God, are you still there? I'm your successor. Danny's consciousness entered a weirwood that was dancing like a tentacle and called out sincerely. I know that you could not see any hope of stopping the world pendant, so you had no choice but to merge with the S-God. But reality has proven that your main personality is correct. You felt the power of the first flame. I'm your real hope. I have a weirwood trunk. That's your home. Give up on Frost God and part ways with him. Chapter 1029. In the face of Danny's affectionate cry, there was no response from the roots of the weirwood. Door God, old weirwood? Danny was not discouraged. Instead, she worked harder and increased her strength. Her spiritual power went up along the roots of the weirwood and spread deeper. How dare you? You're digging your own grave. The vast, cold soul pressed close and crushed Danny's non-GMO soybeans into powder as easily as a millstone crushing beans. But not long after, the disappearing spiritual power gradually created something out of nothing, and the bean powder condensed into soybeans in the weirwood. This was the indestructible characteristic of the soul of the Green Prophet. Door God, old weirwood, are you still there? I am the singer of the Song of the First Fire, and the successor of your great mission. Wake up quickly, repent and be saved. Popped after saying this, the stone mill of the God of Frost came again, and Danny's little bean was crushed into bean juice. But in the blink of an eye, Danny returned to her original state and shouted, Don't do useless things. When have you seen the Green Prophet die in the roots of the weirwood? What's more, I'm now the speaker of the old gods. The Door God cares for me, and in the roots of the Door God, my soul will never be destroyed. Then before the God of Frost crushed her into powder again, she immediately shouted, Weirwood, I have something to say, please listen to me. Cold and darkness could indeed stabilize the world at a certain level, but that was all. Not only could the world fall, but it also had the hope of ascending. A dead world without sunlight prevented the fall, but maintained the state at the same level forever, completely losing the hope of ascending to a higher dimension. Such a world was no different from death. Only flames and vigorous vitality could bring upward power to the world. The living had an unlimited future. And even if the ghouls could move, they were just corpses. This was also why the first sun god gave up the darkness and coldness that gave birth to him, and would rather sacrifice himself to ignite the first sun. He wanted to lift the world into a higher dimension. He failed, but his ideals were great and noble, and his spirit would live on forever. You are his heir, and I am your heir. Let us pass on the torch. Now I've already sung the Song of Fire, and there's hope for the first flame in the future. I've also eavesdropped on the Frost God's Song of Ice, and I've gained some enlightenment. In the near future, Frost God will definitely follow in Lalo's footsteps and have his Song of Laws taken away by me. I will sing the Song of Ice and Fire. My future is great. Our common goal will soon be realized. Door God, repent and give up on the foreignness God. Dani was surprised that the Frost God had given her a chance to use up all the ammunition in her mouth. Die. But in the next moment, there seemed to be a bolt of lightning in the void. Her vision blurred, and she completely lost consciousness. Yes, the consciousness that entered the root of the weirwood was completely annihilated. It seemed like another power that was different from the god of frost had made its move. Dani was puzzled. Could it be the root of the door god? As long as the green prophet's soul entered the weirwood, even a true god would not be able to annihilate it. At this time, Dani could be called the god of the green prophet, but the door god was not limited by this. But what did it mean to wait for her to finish her mouth before attacking? Roar! King Kong's angry roar woke her up from her thoughts. Her main body sent another consciousness across tens of thousands of miles to King Kong's mind. But before Dani could ask for death again, the frost god's weirwood root quickly retreated into the crack, and the Dognod's spatial crack slowly closed. The frost god retreated. Idiot, your song of power divinity was given to you by me, and your ice divinity and divine power were all transformed by me. The reason why your soul is so strong and tenacious is because I gave you a huge amount of divinity and spirituality. Who gave you the courage to devour me? Who? King Kong covered its face and cried, crying for its tragic fate. Dani said coldly, you heartless thing, without me, you can't even return to your home. Without me, the millions of King Kong skeletons in your cave will be your final future. Without me, you'll always be a wild monkey in the wilderness that no one knows about. King Kong was stunned for a moment, then stopped crying thoughtfully, and kowtowed to the Dragon Queen again. The flames roasted the ice and snow on the ground, forming a small turbid lake on the black ground, and mud splattered everywhere from King Kong's head. Only then did Dani retract her divine power, and King Kong regained control of the divine power in its body. The flames on the surface of its body were extinguished, and only green smoke was left on the surface of its charred skin. A cold wind blew, and the hairless King Kong shivered. Then it was pleasantly surprised to find that the rotten skin and flesh that was whipped by the frost god had healed, and its condition was better than before. It seems that Buddha Dani wasn't just punishing it, but also healing its law injuries. King Kong suddenly felt grateful to its ancestor. Roar! Roar! It smiled foolishly at her, trying to please her. Dani rolled her eyes, and left the mark of a subordinate god on the core of King Kong's soul. Aside from the relationship between master and servant and faith, the two of them now had a monarch and servant relationship. Now that you've become a Frost King Kong, I'll grant you the power of wind and fire. First, kill the remaining evil gods of ice, then head north until you reach the seaside. Use the power of ice to form an ice boat, and ride the wind to Slaves Bay. Roar! King Kong's legs were surrounded by a white tornado, and like a spring, it jumped 100 meters and disappeared into the north. 3 days later, Frost King Kong sacrificed 15 evil gods of ice and thousands of frost god believers to the Dragon Queen. Then it really crossed the sea and headed north. This was a story for later. After Dani separated from King Kong, she did not immediately rush to the Iron Islands. She encountered a problem in her cultivation, and had to spend half a month to comprehend the Song of Ice in town. How to put it? It was as if a new song of law was about to break through the ground, but it was suppressed by another force. Dani was not bragging to Weirwood Treeroot. She really did have an epiphany about the Song of Ice. In ancient times, there was Zhuge Liang borrowing arrows with a straw boat, and now there was Dragon Queen borrowing strength with a meat boat. Her original plan was to use King Kong, this meat mountain, to cheat the frost god of his divine power and divinity. In her mind, with King Kong's huge body, how much soul power would it consume to transform it into an ice demigod? At least let the frost god suffer heavy losses, right? The result was unexpectedly good. Not only did she successfully cut off a big piece of meat from the frost god, making him furious, but Danny also accidentally heard the frost god sing the Song of Ice himself. How precious was such a situation? Danny had heard the Song of Wind of the door god in the Great Wall, and learned the technique of listening to the sound of the wind on that day. Less than a year later, she became a wind demigod, and a few months later, her Song of Wind also took shape. Now it was even more exaggerated than before. She took more than a year to sing her own Song of Wind. Now that she heard the Song of Ice, she had an impulse to immediately sing her own Song of Ice. But there was a force in her that kept stopping this impulse. That feeling was like meeting a familiar person. She even reached out her hand to greet him, and the name was on the tip of her tongue, but her brain was dragging her back, and she could not remember what his name was. Hiss, isn't this too exaggerated? You only heard it once and you want to sing it? Bran exclaimed in disbelief. The situation back then was very special. The frost god was singing the Song of Ice to King Kong through the roots of the weirwood tree. It was like I was lying on the weirwood tree and listening to the door god's Song of Wind. This was like Feng Qingyang killing a devil sect disciple. Even with Ling Huchong's talent, seeing him use the 9 swords beyond the swords, he only felt that it was exciting, but he did not understand much. It was even more impossible for him to use the 9 swords beyond the swords immediately. If Feng Qingyang wanted to teach him the secrets of the sword, even if he only used the 9 swords beyond the swords once, Ling Huchong could learn it immediately. Even so, your talent is amazing. After sighing, Bran asked again, what is stopping you from singing the Song of Ice? It seems to be the Song of Fire, Danny said uncertainly. Every time the second soul of the Song of Wind in my mind wants to split the seed of ice, the 9-colored spiral meditation foundation will suppress it and prevent it from being born. Sigh, this is a conflict of laws caused by opposing attributes. Bran sighed. Why did the Night Lion marry the Lady of Light? And why did the Anami have children with the Goddess of Wind? They all wanted to master the supreme law of the universe, but they could not fuse the songs of laws with 2 opposing attributes with their own strength. So they gave birth to descendants who fused the 2 bloodlines. Because they had the bloodline of both parents, some first-generation gods' descendants were especially talented and could naturally accept the 2 opposing laws. Then, referring to the fusion seed of the opposing laws in the gods' descendants, the father god and mother god would fine-tune their songs of laws. Finally, the father god and mother god would use their own god blood to exchange for the special bloodline of the gods' descendants that fused the 2 laws, so that their own bloodline could evolve. This way, their new bodies would be able to accept each other's songs of laws. In theory, it would be a win-win situation, but in practice, it seemed that one side would always sacrifice themselves to fulfill the other. The Lady of Light fulfilled the Night Lion, and the Goddess of Wind fulfilled the Anami. As for the reason, I am not too sure. Chapter 10:30. The Dragon Queen treated him with sincerity and righteousness, but he didn't agree immediately. Instead, he asked for Bran's opinion seriously. However, Danny didn't mind. This wasn't a one-off deal. The whole process would take at least a few years, and at most a few hundred years, a few thousand years, or even more than 10,000 years. They could only cooperate until the end if John was completely willing. If you don't agree, you have to rely on your own power to become a demigod. Only the long lifespan of a demigod can guarantee that you have enough time to comprehend the Song of Ice. However, the Dragon Queen has already defied the heavens and changed your fate. You used to be the savior, but now you've lost your destiny. At this point, Bran sighed. It's not that she stole your destiny. It's just that the people you're saving are different. In the original destiny, your best ending was to end the long night and start the next era. However, the long night was only paused, and the world's downward trend didn't change. In other words, you didn't save the world but humans. You only saved half of it. The future of humans is still in the hands of the gods. Her Majesty can save the world from its roots. This long night will be the last long night, and humans will no longer be the playthings of the gods. Although the Dragon Queen has replaced the gods, she probably won't play with the fate of humans. Probably. The corner of his mouth twitched. You're not confident in yourself, so how can I believe you? I made a believer similar to the three-eyed crow. It's the manager of the new world, Danny interrupted. Yes, we should believe in it just like how we believe in the three-eyed crow. Bran seemed to be comforting himself. Don't stray from the topic, Danny said calmly. Jon, you've lost your destiny. If you don't agree with the Queen's plan, it'll be difficult for you to sing the Song of Ice with your own ability without the support of the world's will. If you agree with the Queen's plan, you're destined to have no fate with the Song of Ice. It will definitely belong to the Queen. Of course, your efforts won't go to waste. Firstly, with the frost seed provided by the Queen, you can at least become a demigod. Secondly, there is a chorus besides the main song. Even if you hand over the Song of Ice, your comprehension of the laws of ice will not disappear. Comprehending the chorus of the Song of Ice will be as easy as flipping your hand. After careful consideration, Bran wasn't sure which choice was the most beneficial to Jon. Therefore, he tried his best to explain the pros and cons in a fair manner and let Jon choose for himself. This was the path he had chosen. Even if he found that the ground was full of holes, he could only slap himself a few times and grit his teeth to persevere to the end. Jon said hesitantly, demigod at the very least and true god at the very least. With such a beautiful future, is there still a need to consider other options? The chorus is relatively weak. It's restrained by the main song, and its potential is limited, Danny said. But even if I don't agree, there's no hope for me to comprehend the main song of the Song of Ice. Jon smiled bitterly. Furthermore, how can I compete with the Queen for what she wants? He sighed in his heart. Even if he didn't know much about the competition of laws, he knew the simple principle of Tao disappears if the body dies. You won't regret it? Danny asked in the end. There's nothing to regret. Even if it's just to kill Frost God, I'm willing to pay any price. Besides, there are other benefits. Jon's expression was firm. Also, you're my aunt. I'm happy to be able to help you. Finally, the meat is in the pot. Yes, as long as it didn't conflict with Stark's interests, his three values were still relatively correct. If that's the case, let's begin. Now. Jon looked around the leaky wooden warehouse. Here. It's very simple. You just need to relax your mind. Later, a consciousness will enter your sea of consciousness. The process was indeed very simple. First, Danny's 9-colored vortex entered Blackie's sea of consciousness and overclocked with his 9-colored vortex. This was equivalent to her giving Blackie complete control of the Song of Fire. This process couldn't last long. If it took too long, Danny's main soul of the Song of Fire would completely die. Then, during the period when the Song of Fire was lost, Danny's second soul ring split into a brand new subsoul. The subsoul recorded all of her understanding of the Song of Ice. It was the so-called seed of the Song of Ice. If the seed was allowed to grow, in a few days or a few months, Danny would be able to express her feelings and naturally sing her own Song of Ice. Yes, it was just the beginning. But she didn't even have a day. Her main soul was still overclocking with Blackie. Thus, this seed turned into a consciousness and merged with Jon's sea of consciousness. Jon shuddered and felt that there was something extra in his body. Open your mind. Touch it, embrace it, and merge with it. The Dragon Queen's voice was like the evening drum and morning bell, suddenly ringing in Jon's sea of consciousness. Jon had two transcendent professions. Shadowbinder with the power of shadows and Transfiguration with the power of souls. Thus, his sea of consciousness was a black dome with countless green stars representing the green spring. His soul core was a ball of distorted smoke, representing the Shadowbinder. Dark red sparks flickered in the fog representing the blood witchcraft and fire witchcraft. Whoosh! An ice blue sun appeared under the dark green star's dome. Its aura was exactly the same as the green stars in the sky. Its essence was the green spring that the old god had bestowed upon Transfiguration. But it wasn't just the green spring. Looking at the ice blue sun, Jon felt the warmth of a mother's embrace, but also a bone-chilling coldness. But his desire for coldness exceeded the concern of a mother. Any believer of the old god would feel a sense of peace when they saw the green spring. John was no exception, and his own destiny of ice and death was extremely eager for the seed of the Song of Ice. John didn't hesitate anymore. His soul core split out a tentacle made of black smoke. It slowly moved upward and touched the ice-blue sun. Buzz! It was as if fate had met. In an instant, Danny and John's souls shook violently. A picture scroll slowly unfolded in front of John. The picture recorded coldness, emptiness, silence, darkness, despair. His soul suddenly rose into the sky, into the star realm beyond the heavens, and then continued to rise into the empty universe. He raised his head and saw an illusory platform. He lowered his head and saw another illusory platform. Between the two platforms, a translucent bubble slowly fell. On the surface of the bubble, there were many stars. Most of the stars were completely dim. The brightest star made people feel fear and hatred just by looking at it. This is our world. The stars are the true gods. The brightest star represents the frost god. John had an epiphany. Everything he saw unfolded in front of Danny's eyes. She saw even more. Outside of the ice, she saw fire. The world was silent in the ice, and the world was born in the fire. It was very strange. When she saw fire, she felt close to it. When she saw ice, she felt the same. At this moment, her Song of Fire's progress did not increase, but the first flame characteristic in her Song of Fire started to increase rapidly. This surprised her. What made her even more surprised was that she had comprehended the Song of Ice, and even the highest mastery of the Song of Ice, death. The Song of Fire had mastery, and the highest mastery was creation. The Song of Ice also had mastery, and the highest mastery was death. The death here was different from the death god's law of death in the world. The death god controlled the final fate of all living things. The Song of Ice's death represented the end of all things. It could be said that the death god's death was the chorus of the world's end. Now, Danny was comprehending the mastery of death. What did this mean? It meant that if she could comprehend the Song of Ice, it would definitely be the highest level of the Song of Ice. Why is this happening? She was puzzled. Suddenly, her sea of law shook. Bran was overjoyed. John reached the heavens in a single step, instantly crossing the threshold of demigod, and singing the Song of Ice? Then he was bewildered. This is too fast. Could it be? He looked at the Dragon Queen and then at John. Their wills were like a star and a planet. The Dragon Queen was a star and John was a planet. The two stars were connected by spiritual power, and were moving in an uncoordinated manner. The planet was originally hovering on the edge of demigod, and could not break through for a long time. The star's huge gravitational force instantly brought the planet out of the bottleneck. After reaching the next level, the planet headed toward the ice domain, pointing out the direction for the star. The star's gravitational force was the driving force for the planet to move forward. I see. This is the Song of Ice and Fire plan that Lalo had been planning for 10,000 years. John and the Dragon Queen accidentally reached the realm that Lalo dreamed of. Bran was enlightened. Then he felt a little regretful. In Lalo's original plan, John should be the leader, and the Dragon Queen should sacrifice herself to help John. Now it was the opposite. Of course, without the Oreo Lalo, John would not be at a disadvantage. From a lose-lose situation before changing fate, it became a win-win situation after the Dragon Queen changed fate. However, it was a win-win situation for Danny and John, but a huge loss for Lalo. No, in the Smoke Sea, at the mouth of the Trench volcano where the sheep egg was sealed, the Light King Lalo hugged his head and howled, "Why is it like this? Why? Why is the heaven so unfair to me? This is my result. I spent 10,000 years in countless efforts. Why should my efforts benefit those two ants? This isn't fair. I also want to know, why do you think that the result of my thousands of years of hard work belongs to you?" In the ancient temple beside him, the sheep egg said resentfully. The lava giant suddenly turned his head and stared at the door of the temple fiercely. He roared, "I am the one who made you, your everything belongs to me." And the same goes for Danny, Rise, and John. After being agitated, he quickly calmed down and said faintly, "I used hundreds of millions of years to study the laws in the world. My hard work and sweat did not go to waste. I created a witchcraft to communicate with the world's will. Impossible. The world's will cannot be communicated. It cannot be communicated. The sheep egg shook his head repeatedly. Lalo sighed and said, if you know all of a person's habits and all of his actions in your eyes, it is just a function problem that contains countless variables. Without meeting or speaking, knowing the variables and solving the function was receiving information from him. Changing the variables and creating the solution to the function you wanted was equivalent to sending him information, and then he would listen to you and do as you said. My communication with the world's will is based on the communicator's comprehensive knowledge of the world. It is not as direct as a normal person's communication. What are functions and variables? The sheep egg was confused. Also, how can you understand the world in all aspects? That is a huge amount of work. No one can do it. You think I have been in a daze in the Earth's core for hundreds of millions of years? As long as you are willing to work hard and persevere, there is nothing you can't do. Lalo said proudly. The sheep egg was silent. After a long silence, Lalo said again, variables and functions are learned from Danny Rice's mathematics book. She specially wrote a bachelor's textbook, and the book Advanced Mathematics is especially interesting. Why do you read a mortal's book? The sheep egg was confused. Danny Rice is immortal? Have you been a god for so long that you have forgotten your identity? Lalo sneered. Also, if you don't even understand the enemy, how can you win? What did you learn from her book, Advanced Mathematics? The power of the first flame? Did you learn something about the Song of Fire? Actually, you can consider giving up on the Song of Fire. It is too difficult for you. Why don't you sing the chorus? It should be easy. Well, it might not be easy for you. But you have perseverance, you are willing to work hard. And you have no competition, you can slowly grind it down. Lalo ignored the sheep egg's sarcasm and said calmly, although advanced mathematics has nothing to do with supernatural power, it contains a lot of powerful knowledge to measure the world. You don't understand, I don't blame you. After all, I am your teacher, and I only cared about teaching you magic. It is all my fault that you look like a vulgar illiterate now. According to what you said, all the kings of the world should be ashamed. They are the vulgar illiterates you speak of. The sheep egg sneered. Are they not? Lalo asked. Chapter 1031. What's the point of understanding Danny Rice's knowledge? Sheep egg could not understand. Lalo glanced at the temple in disdain. She has knowledge, so I will learn from her and use her knowledge to defeat her. Only by knowing yourself and the enemy can you deal with them freely. For example, if I know that you are stupid, I will not talk about the priceless principles of knowledge. Are you saying that I am stupid? Sheep egg shouted. You stupid donkey, after billions of years, the Song of Fire is still so low level. In just a few hundred years I have surpassed you, and now you still have the face to show off in front of me. These words deeply hurt Lalo, and the flames on his body that had calmed down began to boil again. Ungrateful dog, without me, you would only be a lowly shepherd for the rest of your life. I am the one who created you. The birth of Danny Rice and John was not an accident, it was me. Lalo was extremely excited. He stood up and faced the door of the temple, pointed at his nose, and announced proudly and bitterly, "You are all my results." The two had argued countless times about the topic of being ungrateful. Sheep egg was impatient to repeat the useless work, so he remained silent. Seeing that he was silent, Lalo gradually calmed down. However, he seemed to be in a panic and could not help but confide to his former disciple. In the last era, I saved the world and received the gift of the will of the world. I communicated with it and persuaded it to invest all its remaining strength to nurture the seed of the Song of Ice and Fire. The seed was divided into two, ice and fire. The destiny of Yasuo and Ahai has always been in my hands. Without me, ice and fire will never meet. In theory, my plan is perfect. The rudder of fate is in my hands, and the secret key of the treasure chest is also in my hands. He reached out and clenched his hand tightly. But I paid so much and planned for thousands of years. Why did it benefit those two bastards in the end? As Lalo spoke, he became agitated again. He pointed at the door of the temple and cursed, "You are the instigator. If you had not taken away my Song of Fire, even if Danny Rice had some small problems, I would have had the power to stabilize the situation. You ingrate. You don't know what's good for you. You've harmed me and yourself. As long as you remember my kindness, you should sacrifice yourself and help me upgrade Song of Fire to the highest level. When Danny Rise is born, I'll be able to easily fuse with her first flame and create the unparalleled Song of Ice and Fire. Such a perfect plan, but you ruined it. Fuck you. Being constantly insulted, Sheep Egg was also angered. Your Song of Fire's level is too low, and you don't have the qualifications to fuse with the first flame's characteristics. You want me to sacrifice myself to help you, but why? Even if I herded sheep in the valleys of Valeglia for the rest of my life, with the shallow blood witchcraft passed down from my ancestors, with my own wisdom and talents, I would at least have a future as a local ancestor god. It would be better than offering my bloodline and soul to you, wouldn't it? You are my believer, my god. You are still my disciple. I raised you and taught you. I am like a father. Lalo shouted righteously, isn't it natural to sacrifice everything for one's faith, for one's god, and for one's father? I also hope that this is natural. I am Danny Rise's ancestor, the god that her ancestors believed in, the king of her grandfather's generation. Why wouldn't she sacrifice everything to her faith, to her lord, and to her ancestors? Sheep Egg's voice was louder than Lalo's. She doesn't even know you and she doesn't believe in you, but you call me father. You heartless bastard. Lalo spat. Yes, I did call you father back then, but that was because my own father told me that a skinny middle-aged man like you could come to our tribe alone. You were dressed neatly, with rosy cheeks and a noble temperament. You must be extraordinary. My father told me to curry favor with you, so I called you father. Later, I realized that as long as I called you father, you would give me candy, treat me more gently, and teach me more attentively. Why didn't you call me father? If you want to hear it, I can call you father again, father. But that's all fake. Lalo's body trembled and he was in a daze. It was as if he had returned to the hillside where the grass was fragrant and the afternoon sun was slanting. A 3-year-old boy with a strong head called him father back then. It was definitely not fake. You bastard! He cursed dejectedly and lamented, look at the two of us, how are we living? If we could work together, the entire world would be under our feet now. Come on, Sheep Egg said unhappily, if I didn't resist, maybe the two of us could really trample the world under our feet. However, I'm your stepping stone, placed on the world, but under your stinky feet. Moreover, isn't it all thanks to you that I'm living like this today? If you were willing to sacrifice yourself and let me comprehend the characteristics of the ember of the first flame from your body, then when Danny Rise was born I could take away her bloodline, and the person singing the song of the first flame right now would be me. Why didn't you help me? Why did you plot against me? Sheep Egg was full of resentment, and shouted himself hoarse. You heartless thing, how can you say such things? Lalo cursed. Why can't I say it? Isn't that your logic? Deep in the smoke sea, Lalo and Sheep Egg were having a lively conversation. Far away in the astral world, half of Hanshin's body had entered the material world, and he was both shocked and angry. My Song of Ice lost 1%. Who stole my Song of Ice? Could it be Danny Rise? No, it's not her aura, it's someone else, someone related to her fate. He is the original savior of fate, Jon Snow. Hanshin gritted his teeth. My attention has always been on Danny Rise and I neglected him. Now that Danny Rise is restrained by the Righteous Alliance, and the situation in Ursos is stabilizing, maybe we should postpone the attack on Slaver's Bay, and make him the main target. Nas. He called out to his little brother. On Nas Island, the butterfly fairy opened her eyes. My lord, there is no one alive on Nas Island, do you have any other orders? Very good. Sensing the thousands of growing little ghosts on Nos Island, Hanshin praised with satisfaction, and then said seriously, go to the smoke sea again, find Lalo, and tell him that I am willing to help him take back what belongs to him. After listening to the boss plan, the butterfly fairy hesitated and said, Lalo is not stupid. He knows that you are plotting against Jon for the Song of Ice. But if he devours Jon's soul, he will also get his Song of Ice. In other words, we have a fundamental conflict with Lalo. How can we convince him of our sincerity? Hanshin sneered. Jon Snow is very talented, and with the help of Dany Rise, he can take the Song of Ice from me. Lalo is the opposite. He can't even keep his Song of Fire and Song of Light, so what if he gets Jon's Song of Ice? Since I can complete my Song of Ice with my own ability, why should I fight with him for Jon's Song of Ice? That's true. The butterfly fairy suddenly realized. Even if Lalo gets Jon's Song of Ice, Hansen will be able to take it back by fair means soon, so Hanshen's willingness to cooperate was very sincere. Explain to Lalo like this? Will he be angry and refuse to cooperate with us? The butterfly fairy asked hesitantly. The truth is very hurtful, but the truth can also make him feel at ease. Lalo may fly into a rage, but he will not refuse, Hansen said. The butterfly fairy took the order and left. Hansen pondered for a long time and said lightly, "Do you regret it? Am I not you?" He said. The same voice, the same soul fluctuation. He said, "Yes, you are me and I am you. Whether it is Dany Rise or Jon Snow, they are only temporary difficulties. They can't even pass the test of the gods. The world will eventually return to coldness and darkness, and eternal peace and tranquility will follow," he said. He said, "A peaceful world, harmonious people." After that, both of them fell into silence. Dany was the first to wake up, surprised and happy. This time we really took advantage of Lalo. What happened? Bran asked curiously. Why did Jon sing the Song of Ice so quickly? I thought it would take years. Dany smiled and said, I don't know what Lalo did, but after Jon's Ice and Death destiny met with my first Fire destiny, the two sides immediately resonated. It's like they should have been harmonious and complemented each other, but they were divided into two at the beginning of their birth. What kind of resonance? Bran asked curiously. Dany thought for a moment and said, You can think of the Song of Ice and Fire as a house. The house is made of stone walls and wooden beams. If the stone walls are the Song of Fire, and the beams are the Song of Ice, my Song of Fire is of a high level, the stone walls are tall, and the beams are a size smaller. They don't match. But with reference to the small beams and the existing stone wall structure, you can roughly deduce the blueprints of the building, right? With the blueprints, you still don't know what kind of beams to choose? The architectural blueprints of the combination of the beams and stone walls are the resonance of the destinies of Jon and me. Even if his Song of Ice is of a low level, because of the resonance of Ice and Fire destiny, it pointed me in the direction of researching the highest level Song of Ice. When Jon sings the complete Song of Ice, I will start my own highest level Song of Ice. So that's how it is. Bran understood. She and Jon were mutually fulfilling. She could fulfill him and he could fulfill her. In the fate that Lalo had arranged, she would fulfill him, and he would fulfill her. Now, most of the benefits that were destined to belong to Lalo belonged to her, and Jon could also benefit from it. Not long after, Jon woke up from his enlightenment. Bran warned, Lalo and the Frost God will definitely be angry. The Dragon Queen is not afraid of revenge, but Jon, you have to be careful of the Red God priest like you are of deviant ghosts. At this time, half of Jon's talent and destiny was his own, and the other half came from Lalo. In Lalo's original plan, Ice and Fire would be divided. Dany would take the fire and Jon would take the ice. In the end, Dany sacrificed herself, and Ice and Fire merged in Jon's body. Therefore, in the original plan, his target was not Dany but Jon. Chapter 1032. Regardless of whether it was based on science or magic, the development of civilization generally had a continuity. Valeglia's steel and Valeglia's immortal stone were also miracles in modern scientific society, but they did not suddenly appear in the world. Before steel, there was a magical metal called dragon steel. Before immortal stone, there was a magical stone called black stone. Like immortal stone, black stone was abnormally sturdy and immortal. In the last era, the center of civilization was the barren land in the east. The kingdom of Dawn built by the emperor was so powerful that it could suppress the gods. In that kingdom, black stone was used in large quantities. In order to defend against the evil demons in the eastern dark world, the emperor built 5 giant fortresses in the eastern border, which were now called 5 bases. 5 bases was a miracle of the world, as famous as the Great Wall. It was made of black stone and could accommodate a large army of more than 10,000 people for a long time. It was more than 1,000 meters tall. That's right, not 100 meters but more than 1,000 meters, like a mountain. Perhaps it was a building specially designed to resist the gods' forbidden spells? In the Westeros there were also black stone buildings. For example, the sea stone seat that the Dragon Queen was sitting on now. Compared to the miracles of 5 bases, the sea stone seat was as small as a speck of dust. However, this stone chair that looked like a squid on a plate represented the supreme power of the Iron Islands. It's been almost 2 months, and you have made no progress at all? Asha looked up and glanced at the queen, who was swaying her legs with her legs crossed. She was a little scared. The queen was wearing armor and had a great sword by her feet. Was she going to go crazy with this fully armed appearance? She did not know if Inami could withstand the queen's sword. If she could not, how could she appease Timon, who had lost his faith? The Duchess of the Iron Islands squeezed out a flattering smile and said, "Your Majesty, I've really tried my best, but I'm not an Inami priest. Even after praying for more than a week, Her Majesty Inami still ignored me. Inami isn't a saint. Rather than praying, I'd rather kill a few people." Dany's mouth twitched. The third drowned man, Thale replied. 7 drowned men have already committed suicide by jumping into the sea. Their souls have already entered the flowing water palace to personally state your alliance to Her Majesty the Inami. Dany raised her eyebrows and said strangely, "This is a good idea." Her complexion improved a little. 7 people were drowned, which meant that Iron Sea didn't slack off. "Your Majesty, you have to be prepared. I'm guessing that Her Majesty Inami has declined your request," Thale said cautiously. Dany gently patted the armrest with her right hand. After thinking for a moment, she asked, "What do you think about this matter?" "What idea?" Asha and Priest Taleb were confused. "The Inami refused to save the world and ignored you. Do you still believe in her? Or do you have any complaints in your heart?" Dany asked. Asha's complexion changed a few times. She hesitated. Of course she was dissatisfied, but she wasn't stupid. How could she say it out loud? Thale shook his head as if he had been electrocuted. "We Iron Seed were created by the Inami. How could we complain about our own god?" "You don't dare, but what about me?" Dany smiled faintly. "Do you think that after being ignored for 2 months, I won't resent her?" Plop! The two paled and knelt on the ground together. "Your Majesty, please calm down. I think we should give Her Majesty the Inami a chance to turn over a new leaf." Asha's mouth was loose, and she said what was on her mind. The third drowned man's face twisted. "Duke, you should respect Her Majesty the Inami." "Of course I respect Her Majesty the Inami, but she's in danger now. I'm worried," Asha said anxiously. The third drowned man's voice faltered, and he mumbled, Why, calm down." Dany waved her hand. "I'm not an evil person. Even if Inami refuses, I will only persuade her. Fighting and killing is not in line with the Holy Mother's teachings of mercy." The third drowned man breathed a sigh of relief, and suddenly had an idea. "Your Majesty, why don't you talk to Her Majesty the Inami personally?" Dany frowned. "I've tried, but she didn't respond. If it doesn't work, I can only force my way into the flowing water palace. Are you interested in taking a look?" I'm a living person. Can I go to the flowing water palace?" Asha said blankly. "Why do you have to do this? Why do you have to do this?" The old shaman slammed his hands on the ground in agitation and cried out, "Your Majesty, please don't force your way into the flowing water palace. If there's a conflict, then if Her Majesty the Inami gets hurt, that's not good." The old shaman mumbled. Even he subconsciously believed that Inami couldn't withstand a few blows from the Dragon Queen. "Don't worry, I'll be merciful. I promise I won't kill your god." "Kill?" The old shaman shuddered and hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, I have a way for you to contact my master." "What way?" Dany asked curiously. "Do you know Naga Hill?" "That's the temple of Her Majesty the Inami," Shaman Taylor said. Dany nodded thoughtfully. "I can go there and take a look." Then she got up from the chair, picked up her sword, and hung the sword belt on her left waist. She held the weirwood cane in her right hand and pointed it in front of her. A thin green line appeared in the air in front of the throne. The line pulled to the left and right, and a round door with a light green membrane appeared. Huff, huff, boom. The north wind howled, and the turbid waves shattered on the rocks. The dark seawater and gray foam even passed through the green membrane and fell on the face of the Duke of the Iron Islands, who was stunned. "What is this?" she asked dryly. "Are you going?" Danny asked. "To where?" Asha asked blankly. It's Old Wake Island. Is this the legendary dimensional door?" Shaman Taili suddenly realized and exclaimed. "I'll go." Asha also came back to her senses and looked at the Dragon Queen in awe. She swallowed and said, "This dimensional door is a little high. I need to find a chair to cushion it." Danny smiled faintly. With a gentle push of her palm, the planar membrane hanging in front of the throne sped forward horizontally. It left the range of the royal stairs and descended vertically. Then it stuck close to the marble floor and crashed into Asha like lightning. Whoosh! The dimensional door flew past, and Asha disappeared. The dimensional door turned and flew, and with another whoosh, the dumbfounded Shaman Taili disappeared. Ah! The maids and guards in the throne room finally reacted and couldn't help but exclaim. Danny shrugged and didn't explain. She jumped lightly and landed in the dimensional door that was flying towards her. Without a sound, the Dragon Queen disappeared along with the light green spatial gate, leaving the attendants looking at each other in dismay. "By the name of Anami, have we really arrived at Old Wake Island?" Asha covered her mouth and exclaimed as she stood in the bone-chilling Grey Sea King's hall. The Anami's temple wasn't in Greyjoy's Pike City. Just like the Tully and Tyrell families, the Greyjoy family was able to become the most powerful family in the Iron Islands because Targaryen helped them get rid of their respective kings. Before the War of Conquest, the Hall family had ruled the Iron Islands for nearly 6,000 years. The Hall family's achievements were much more impressive than the Greyjoy family's. At that time, not only was the River Gap Chimene's territory, but the western region, the Riverbend, the Stormlands, and the valleys were all areas where the Ironseed family expanded. The largest castle in the Seven Kingdoms wasn't Casterly Rock City or Storm's End Castle, but Helen Castle by the Divine Eye Lake. It was the palace of the Hall family. This was also why the Greyjoy family's fief was neither the largest nor the richest. The largest island in the Iron Islands was Great Wake Island, the most fertile island was Harlow Island, and the most sacred island was Old Wake Island. The Greyjoy family's Pike City was small and barren. It also lacked a good harbor. Due to the weathering of the promontory, there were many rocks in the nearby sea. Woo-woo! The moment Danny's feet touched the ground, a hurried horn sounded from the side. It was their arrival that triggered the sentry's alarm. Not far from the Grey Sea King's hall, there were several sentry towers erected. The sky was dark and turbid waves surged. The bottom of the towers was covered in a layer of eye-catching white alkali. The flames in the towers flickered and the sentry with a torch was running towards them. "Don't worry, it's me," Asha shouted at the soldiers who had drawn their swords and crossbows. The sky was dark and Asha didn't light a torch. The guards could only vaguely see a few figures. The howling cold wind distorted the Duchess' voice. Danny opened her right hand. Black foam appeared in the palm of her silver iron glove. Caw! The foam condensed into a black crow. The black crow leaped into the air and exploded into a fireball in the sky. The scorching fireball flickered a few times. The flames were restrained and the temperature was lowered. However, it suddenly shone brightly. The Grey Sea King's hall was as bright as day. This is... The soldiers who were running towards them stopped and covered their eyes in shock. "It's me." Asha took a few steps forward and recognized the leader. She pointed at Danny and said, "Tanner, this is the Dragon Queen." Then, she introduced him to the Dragon Queen. "Your Majesty, this is Tanner Zhuagu, the second son of Bonehand Dunstan." Zhuagu was the lord of Old Wake Island. His clan emblem was a skeletal palm. After the greetings, Tanner left the other guards outside and followed Danny and the others into the Grey Sea King's hall. The so-called Grey Sea King's hall was actually the stomach of the sea dragon Naga. 44 ribs were the beams and pillars. Between the ribs hung a curtain made of silver seaweed. The interior area was more than 1,000 square meters. It was said that Naga was the world's first sea dragon. It was extremely powerful and could overturn rivers and seas. However, it was still no match for the Gray Sea King. When its body was dragged to the hill, the Inami came and turned Naga's bones into fossils. That's how it looks now. The old shaman squatted on the ground and stroked the thick spine of a train. His tone was filled with pride that made Danny disgusted. She looked indifferent. She walked to the end of the hall and passed through the passage made by the sea dragon's throat bones. She came to the head of the megalosaurus. The Gray Sea King used the sea dragon's mouth to create a gray throne. The sea dragon's teeth were like a crown that surrounded the throne. After a moment's hesitation, Danny sat on it. With both hands on the armrest, Danny took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and opened them again. In an instant, the timeline in her eyes flew back 4 years ago. Wet Magic Iron gathered all the Iron Seed captains to hold a king selection meeting. Only captains were eligible to participate in the king selection meeting. Yolan of Scylla and Asha announced their respective elections here. Yolan of Scylla's plundering of the world was better than Asha's taking land for farming. Asha hoped that the north would cede the rock coast in the west to the Iron Islands, so that the Iron Seed could farm for a living. 6,000 years ago, in the second last king selection meeting before Iron, the Grayan family violated the rules set by the Inami and slaughtered all the candidates. Blood stained the ribs of the Naga. After that, the king selection meeting became a decoration. The Grayan family became the hereditary king of the Iron Islands. Until 1,000 years later, the Hall family joined forces with Greyjoy and slaughtered the Grayan family. After that, Danny witnessed 111 king selection meetings one after another. Basically, she became more and more moral. Looking at the river of time, she became more and more shameless. For example, when the Iron King was old and weak, he arranged for his son to ascend the throne. When the new Iron King ascended the throne, he immediately massacred the people of the previous generation of the Iron Throne. In the tales, there was the story of the Gray Sea King killing the Naga. At that time, she took it for granted that Naga was the name of a race, and Sea Dragon represented a branch of the Megalosaurus. Later, as her understanding of the world deepened, the things that she took for granted began to become uncertain. Except for the Sea Dragon of the Iron Islands, there were no other legends of the Sea Dragon in the world. This was not normal. For example, the Megalosaurus had been wiped out before the last long night. It was not until 6,000 years ago that Valeglia used blood witchcraft to resurrect a new Megalosaurus. Megalosaurus was also very rare, but all over the world, including inside and outside the Great Wall of the Westeros, Megalosaurus skeletons had been found. In some areas, fossilized dragon eggs could still be excavated. Megalosaurus's spirit fused with the fire magic power in its body could be called a fire seed. If the Naga were a pure water-type creature, they should not have a fire seed. More than 14,000 years ago on Old Wake Island, a dragon corpse that was more than 100 meters long lay on the Howling Hills. The sun was shining brightly, and the wind was gentle. The dark blue dragon scales reflected the bright light. Ironseed held bronze and obsidian weapons, dancing the sacrificial dance around the dragon corpse. From time to time, he would squat down and scoop a ladle of hot and clear dragon blood from the gully and pour it on his head. Ironseed's king was a strong middle-aged man with a driftwood crown on his head. His beard, hair, and eyes were all gray like the sea in winter. Long live the Gray Sea King! Long live the Gray Sea King! Ironseed's eyes were fanatical, as if he was his god. Gray Sea King stood on the sea dragon's nose, looking down at the heroes and looking around. Then, he held the hilt of the iron sword that was inserted between the sea dragon's eyebrows. It was a strange-looking greatsword. Including the hilt, it was more than 3 meters long. When it was placed in front of him, it could cover his face. The spine of the sword was almost as thick as the soles of his feet. The blade was black and filled with jagged gaps. Thus, the blade was pulled out. Hot blood mixed with white juice sprayed all over Gray Sea King. Supreme God, this is your sacrifice. Gray Sea King, who was almost 2.5 meters tall, raised the 3-meter-long greatsword. It did not look out of place at all. Boom! Not far away, the seawater exploded into 10-meter-tall waves. All the iron seeds stopped singing and looked over in awe. The seawater by the beach had a life of its own. It flowed ashore like a red carpet, spreading all the way up to the top of the hill. A majestic and tall god floated up from the water. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, and handsome facial features. Without moving his feet, his body flowed along the flowing carpet to the top of the hill. The so-called first sea dragon in the world is actually a demigod megalosaurus who understood the water rule. Sigh, it wasn't easy for the stupid megalosaurus to have a genius who understood the rule, but it was destroyed by you. Danny sighed. You feel sorry for this evil creature? Inami sneered. Do you know why the megalosaurus became extinct at the end of the last era? She kicked the sea dragon's forehead a few times and said sarcastically, Naga hid in the Westeros because she ate all the megalosaurus in the continent of Ursos. Danny frowned. So, the megalosaurus became extinct because of you? You killed the last megalosaurus. Inami choked and said angrily, I don't want to argue with you. Leave. We can't work together. I'm stronger than you, and my future is brighter than yours. You'll have a better future if you follow me. Why won't you submit? Danny asked curiously. If a mortal said the same thing to you 10,000 years later, what would you do? Inami asked. Danny thought for a while and said, I'd slap that ungrateful dog to death. Inami's mouth twitched a few times and said in a muffled voice, If that's the case, why do you have to force me? Danny said confidently, We're different. Everyone has different circumstances. You have to be honest and accept reality. The reality is that I can slap you to death, but you can't hurt me at all. You can try. Chapter 1034. Your Majesty, shall we begin? Asha asked. Just now, the Dragon Queen had walked straight through the hall and corridors to the throne at the end of the Grey Sea King's hall. Then she closed her eyes and meditated. After a few minutes they could not wait any longer. Danny opened her eyes and asked, Begin what? Asha was stunned for a moment. Then she turned to look at Priest Thale beside her. What should we do to communicate with Her Majesty Inami? Hold a sacrificial ceremony in the center of the hall. There is a chance that we can contact the Flowing Water Palace, the old priest said. Danny smiled and shook her head. No need. I have already met with Inami. She stopped smiling and stood up from the stone throne. Then she sighed. I did not want to make a big fuss, but she is stubborn. There is nothing I can do. Inami has appeared before? Where? Tanner Chogu looked around with a suspicious expression. Right here, but it was in the Dawn era. 10,000 years ago. Everyone's expression was strange. All right, I have now confirmed Inami's attitude. Your mission is almost complete. Danny waved her hand and changed the topic. Then she glanced at Asha and Thale. But everything has a beginning and an end. There should be a conclusion between me and Inami. You must prepare yourselves. Your Majesty, you are going to attack Her Majesty Inami? Thale was terrified. Asha was also shocked. Didn't you say that it was okay if Inami did not agree? You also said that you, who follow the path of the Holy Mother of Mercy, are not an evil person. You will never attack Inami. Tanner Chogu was a little confused. What preparation? Don't be nervous. It's not a big deal, just like... Danny glanced at Asha. Just like King Balan and Robert. Back then, King Balan declared himself king and rebelled against the Iron Throne. In the end, Robert led his men to break down the city walls of Pike City and rushed into the castle. He taught Balan what it means to respect the strong. Asha's face changed several times. One moment it was red, the next moment it was green, and the next moment it was white. I don't think so. She mumbled. Your Majesty, is there a misunderstanding? Priest Tower was sweating in the cold winter. There is no misunderstanding. I advised your Master God to be a good person, but he humiliated me, Danny said. Tanner felt like he was listening to a fairy tale. Because the story was so fantastical, the surprise in his heart gradually surpassed the fear. He could not help but ask, how did the Inami humiliate you? I said he can't beat me. The weak obey the strong. It's only right. Then that bastard said, "Come at me if you dare." Dragon Queen told him the truth. Her expression was angry, as if she had been greatly insulted. Tanner's face twisted. That sounds like, I thought the gods were more dignified and holy. Why does it sound like two street gangsters fighting? Asha's face twisted as well. Tower was stunned for a moment. He mumbled, if the first time doesn't work, there's always a second time. A street gangster's negotiation was not something that could be done in one go. Danny shook her head and sighed. There's no way. Those ancient gods looked down on humans from the bottom of their hearts. Back then, Wade Fry was the richest family in Fujian. His power in Fujian was second only to Tully. But the old nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, including those who were so poor that they could barely afford a set of armor, all looked down on Fry. Bolton was the second in the north. Hyder was the second in River Bend. Starfall was the second in Dorne. Roos was the second in the valley. Look at how they were treated among the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. Look at Fry, the second in Fujian. Fry was still a human, and he was still on the same level as the old nobles. But the gods were not humans at all. They were born above humans. Secondly, even if they brought Inami believers, the Inami would not overreact. But in front of the believers, the Inami would be embarrassed to compromise. They might even fight fiercely. So there was only one benefit to bringing Asha to the Flowing Water Palace. Show off in front of the people and show off. To be honest, Danny was dissatisfied with the lackluster response to the Cloud Hall incident in the Seven Nations. In her opinion, it was the greatest achievement since the creation of the world that she had broken into the god's kingdom as a mortal and killed the true god. The gods should be shocked, and so should the people. They should be so shocked that they would not be able to eat in peace for decades. Well, every time she ate, she could hear people talking about her feet with shocked expressions. But the truth was that she had already spread the news through the magic net. The people of the world were indifferent and did not believe it. Not only were the people in the streets shocked, the singers, poets, and playwrights would rather go outside the city to peel the bark off trees than to put in the effort to compile Dragon Queen slaying the storm god into wonderful poems, stories, and stage plays to exchange for a few meat pies. They definitely could not exchange for meat pies. Otherwise, why would those hungry bards gnaw on tree bark? All three of you are going? Danny felt that she needed a third party to publicize the battle process and results. I can go to the Flowing Water Palace too? Tanner Cho pointed at his own nose, looking absent-minded. Divine power is mainly used to open the space door. There's no difference between bringing one living person and bringing 10 living people. It's up to you whether you want to go or not. I have no problem with it, Danny said. Tanner was surprised and happy. Suddenly he had an idea. He hurriedly said, if that's the case, can you call my father too? Do you have a scholar in your family? Danny asked. In the Westeros, as long as the nobles had the ability, they would build a crow's nest, raise a scholar, build a divine forest, build a small sanctuary, and invite a cultivator. The customs of the Iron Islands were different. For thousands of years before Aegon unified the Seven Nations, they had always rejected the Seven Gods Church and did not trust the scholars. Even after the War of Conquest, the sanctuary was built and destroyed. Cultivators who came were chased away. Many nobles refused to accept the scholars. Yes, Scholar Bruno has served our family for 20 years, Tanner said. Does he know how to make up stories? I'm not sure. But Scholar Bruno is very good at telling stories. Danny nodded in satisfaction. Go call him. Old Wake Island was not big. The Chogu family was only 2 kilometers away from Naga Hill. In less than an hour, 7 or 8 assault boats gathered on the beach at the foot of the hill. Several families on the island had heard the news and came. Bonehand, Dunstan looked at the Dragon Queen suspiciously and asked, My eldest son died in the river with you, Luan. Can I see him in the Flowing Water Palace? Was he brave? Danny asked. Brave and good at fighting, the old man said proudly. Inami only needs strong and brave rowers. If your son meets the requirements, he'll probably be in the Flowing Water Palace. Danny answered casually and signaled Thale to start the Inami sacrifice. Taiman had done similar activities countless times. He was already familiar with it. Soon, a pile of firewood rose in the center of the Gray Sea King's hall. The drowned people stood on the side and sang the Inami song loudly. Ironseed sat around the fire, eating meat and drinking wine. When everyone was drunk, they stood in 2 rows on both sides of the fire, laughing and playing the finger dance. The so-called finger dance was when 2 people stood face to face with their legs still. Chapter 1035. Wearing a gray, green, and blue coarse robe, Thale first untied the leather pouch hanging on his waist and splashed the salt water on the heads of the 14 iron citizens who were participating in the finger dance. Then he raised the driftwood stick he carried with him, faced the sea and shouted, "The supreme God who is drowning for us, please open your eyes that can see through all things. We will sacrifice our loyalty and courage to you." As Thale's voice fell, Asha, whose hair was wet from the salt water, was the first to throw the hatchet in her hand. The hatchet spun into a circle of bright wheels, and the blade of the hatchet whistled in the air. Perhaps due to the lack of food during the long night, she rarely had a full meal and rarely saw alcohol. Ironseed knew that he was going to play the finger dance later, but he still drank until his face was red and his eyes were blurry. Facing the flying hatchet wheel, he was stunned for a moment. Then he hesitated and stretched out his right hand. With a chi sound, the hatchet blade slashed across and blood splattered. Half of his hand fell on the beach. "Ah, my hand!" The intense pain woke him up from his drunken stupor. He hugged his severed hand and howled at the top of his lungs. "Ha ha ha!" Asha laughed proudly. The drowning song became louder and louder. Thale frowned and waved his hand. He even used his eyes to signal Timon, whose hand was severed. "Don't embarrass Ironseed in front of the Dragon Queen." The other 12 people only glanced over and continued their game, but their mental strength was unprecedentedly focused. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The hatchets flew back and forth above the bonfire. As the rounds passed, Timon was like a fanatical fan who saw Maradona, Pelé, Cruyff, Beckenbauer, Best, Ronaldinho, Messi and the rest of the gods competing together. They were all extremely excited and cheered loudly. The contestants' emotions were also stirred up. As the alcohol in their stomachs began to ferment, every time they swung the hatchet, they would shout and curse loudly. Their faces were fierce. The hatchet spun into a wheel of blades in the air faster and faster. Even the flames of the bonfire below were swaying left and right along with the wheel. "Chi chi chi, ah, my finger!" Finally, after more than 10 rounds, someone lost his hand. He wanted to grab the handle of the hatchet, but accidentally touched the shiny blade of the hatchet. It was as easy as a streamer cutting meat with a knife. The hatchet blade sliced off a third of his hand. A large piece of flesh from his thumb and index finger fell to the sand. "Tsk, tsk, tsk. Oh, oh." Then came the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Not to mention the Ironseeds who were watching. Even Danny felt her blood boiling, and wanted to cheer with them. Could it be that I also have the potential to become an Ironseed? She quickly regained her senses and focused on gathering the power of sacrifice. Comma, 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 roar. Old Dunstan raised his hands and roared towards the sky. Earl Stonehouse, who was in the same group as him, was unlucky. He was hit in the forehead by the hatchet and became the first contestant to lose his life tonight. "How is it?" Thale asked in a low voice. "It's barely enough." Danny nodded. Thale let out a sigh of relief and nodded to the other 11 contestants. The crowd immediately cheered. The basic rule of the finger dance was to stand in place. The body could dodge or catch the hatchet, but the legs could not move. Therefore, the finger dance did not necessarily end when the fingers were chopped off. If the fingers were chopped off, the hand could still be used. If the hand was crippled, the other hand could still be used. The key was what rules were chosen before the game, whether it was a life and death match or just a bet on the winner. But if you wanted to listen to her location, the Line of Faith, and enter the Tomb of the Living Dead to catch Liliddragon, it was wishful thinking. Because there were traps near the Tomb of the Living Dead, And there were countless mechanisms and secret passages in the tomb. There were traps set by the gods near the kingdom of God. But if you let Grandma's son go and followed her, you would definitely be able to break into the tomb. Earl Stonehouse, who had died in the finger dance competition, might not be able to go to the flowing water garden, so he could not be a navigator. Danny was a bit regretful. Back then, she had cut off the head of wet magic iron, but she did not imprison his soul. But she did not regret it, just as she would not forcibly detain the souls of the believers of the old gods in the north. Inami and the storm god were both of the old god's lineage, so she could not mess with her own little brother. If I want to communicate with the Inami, I will go to the beach, stand in the shallows, and pray to the depths of the sea, Thale said. Have you ever succeeded? Danny asked. Thale's expression was awkward. He glanced at Timon around him and nodded slightly. Tell me the truth, Danny said in a low voice. Thale still nodded slightly, but his mouth said in a weak voice, I don't think so. Danny said helplessly, Have you ever received a response from the Inami in your life? Of course, I am the 3 drowned people. Every time I am drowned, I enter the flowing water palace. This time the old priest's tone was very firm. Ironseed had a ritual similar to Christian baptism called drowning. For an ordinary Timon, they only needed to pour seawater on their head, and it was not a complete drowning. But to become a drowned person, they had to go through at least one complete drowning. They had to be pressed into the sea by another drowned person until they were no longer breathing. Then, the drowned person would fall into a state of suspended animation. The drowned believer was dragged to the beach and revived with CPR. The reason why Wet Magic Iron could become the leader of the drowned people was that he never failed when he was drowned. Thale's title of 3 drowned people was also because he had been baptized 3 times. And he could become Iron's successor because he was the drowned person who had the least number of failures besides Yuluen. In Chimin's mind, when they were drowned, they had already died once. Their souls went to the flowing water palace and were revived after receiving the Inami's blessing. Why don't you be drowned again? Danny suggested. If the old priest was not lying, then following his soul would definitely lead them to the flowing water palace. Thale was a little hesitant. If Iron was still alive, he would not mind being drowned again. But if it was someone else, he would not be so assured. Asha saw something and urged in a low voice, Priest Thale, we don't have much time. Seeing the Dragon Queen and the rest of the Timon looking at him, Thale sighed helplessly and nodded in agreement. Priest Norkin, help me be drowned. Norkin was Iron's assistant, and now he was Thale's assistant. Burp okay. The bearded Norkin burped, rolled up his sleeves and walked forward drunkenly. Are you drunk? Smelling the strong smell of alcohol on his underling, Thale's expression turned sour. I haven't had a good drink in years. Norkin grinned. Don't worry, my lord, I'm good at it. I have a 70% success rate. Thale's expression turned even worse. He forced a smile and said to the Dragon Queen, The weather. The water is a little cold. Is your head itchy? Danny asked blankly. Thale picked at his messy seaweed-like hair with a puzzled expression. It is a little itchy. I have lice on my head. Danny raised her chin towards the sea. Since it's itchy, then go wash it. It can't be washed clean. It can be washed clean, Danny said. Chapter 1036. Agitated and nervous, Asha stepped into the green circle of light. The next moment, she felt the world spin around her and she lost consciousness. Asha, you're not dead yet. Why are you in the flowing water palace? Asha, wake up, Asha. A noisy voice sounded in her ears. It was a very familiar male voice. Who was it? Danny, Liz, you lost because you were too arrogant. Ha 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 ha. The sacred and dignified laughter exploded in her ears like thunder. Asha shuddered violently and opened her eyes. Then she rubbed her eyes in disbelief. The 2 familiar yet unfamiliar people in front of her had not disappeared. She was not dreaming, nor was she hallucinating. Dad, Uncle Iron? It's us. You've come to the flowing water palace, Iron said in a low voice. You? Asha looked at her 2 closest relatives. You're different. When Iron was alive, he always wore a rough hemp robe and never cut his hair. His hair and beard were full of seaweed. Now he wore a beautiful robe with gold and silver edges. His hair and beard were still decorated with silver seaweed. He was neat and tidy. King Baron's treatment seemed to be a little poor. He was dressed in a milky white robe with a black iron breastplate over it. He looked like a common soldier. Both of them looked younger than when they were alive. They were about 30 years old, the golden age for men. This is the flowing water palace. You shouldn't have come in with Danny, Liz, Balan said. I'm here to persuade Her Majesty Inami. The queen is fierce and should not be provoked, Asha explained. Sigh, you have no right to interfere with the matters of the gods. Balan sighed. Where are the others? Where's Dragon Queen? Only then did Asha realize that there were only 3 of them around. She looked around. She was in a cluster of red coral. There were red jade shells crawling in the soft sand. There were also strips of seaweed that were as wide as a palm and radiated silver light growing on the black reef. They floated in the water, and all kinds of fish swam in them. Wait, I'm in the water. Only then did Asha notice that there was flowing water around her. It was like the air on the shore. It was inconspicuous, but it was indeed seawater. Why can I breathe underwater? She took a deep breath. A series of bubbles appeared around her lips. Iron is a Yenren, Her Majesty Inami's priest. He saved you, Balan said. Saved me? Asha's expression changed as a bad premonition arose in her heart. She asked again, where's the Dragon Queen? She fell into a trap. Iron, who was once beheaded by the Dragon Queen, did not gloat. Instead, he showed pity and sighed. Not long after the death of the storm god, Her Majesty Inami had the idea of joining the Alliance of Justice. If the Dragon Queen did not push her too far, perhaps after a while, Her Majesty would have parted ways with the gods. However, the dignity of a true god should not be offended. It's a pity that the 7 kingdoms and the world's humans are going to suffer in the coming long night. An even greater sin. Asha was shocked. How is that possible? Everyone has anger, let alone the gods, Balan said. But the Dragon Queen also wants to save the world. Asha's rough face was pale. She could not accept it and shouted. Yuluan became the rightful Iron King in the King Selection Convention. He also wanted to lead the Iron Seed to achieve his ambition. Why were you so determined to rebel against him? Balan asked. There's no such thing as a grand plan for hegemony. He screwed us over, Asha yelled. If the Dragon Queen did not appear out of nowhere, do you think Yuluan would have failed? Balan shook his head. Asha was speechless. Balan continued. When you rebelled against him, you did not know about the existence of the Dragon Queen, did you? The other reasons are false. You are just not convinced. You are not convinced that he stole your crown. Balan said. Asha said angrily. He tried to kill you, and you are still speaking for him. I just want you to understand why Her Majesty Inami did not agree to cooperate with Danny Rise. Balan said helplessly. What's the point of understanding? What happened has already happened. Asha looked around and doubtfully asked, where am I? Where is the Dragon Queen? Did she already get killed by the evil gods? Shut up. Iron was furious and slapped his niece's face. You dare to blaspheme against the gods? Aren't you afraid of being thrown into the flames of the earth and being burned for billions of years? Asha was caught off guard and almost got her head swung 180 degrees. However, she only grimaced and rubbed her dislocated neck, not daring to say anything else. She only asked, the Empress is dead, how do I return? She's not dead yet. Balan looked out of the coral and said, wait until Her Majesty Inami and the gods get rid of Danny Rise. Let's see how she deals with you. Asha followed her father and stood on her tiptoes to look in that direction. But all she saw was a black shadow and a crimson flame, nothing else. Where are the others? Why am I the only one here? She asked. Those with backgrounds just like you were taken away from the battlefield by your grandfather. Those without backgrounds were trapped in the ambush with Danny Rise. Are we really the descendants of the Inami? Asha was surprised. The Greyjoy are the direct descendants of the Grey Sea King, but they have nothing to do with Her Majesty Inami. The legend of the Grey Sea King marrying a mermaid is false. Asha felt a sense of loss as if her dream was shattered. Marrying a mermaid is true, but that mermaid isn't Anami's child. Where are the other Greyjoys? My grandfather, where are they? Asha asked again. They're fighting. Balan pointed at the iron sword at his waist. We're all Anami's rowers. You should know what a rower needs to do when facing an enemy. Oh gods, you're fighting Dany Rise? Aren't you looking for death? Asha's eyes widened in disbelief. We're just soldiers. Balan sighed. I don't think gods will win. Asha said hesitantly. How about we ask grandfather and the others to step down too? How would you know how cunning gods are? Dany Rise won't be able to escape this time. Iron said with certainty. Boom, the black clouds in the distance suddenly exploded. Flames rolled out in all directions like a tsunami. The seawater began to burn. Corals, seaweed, fish, and other dreamlike scenes in a burning mural turned into nothingness in front of their eyes. They were horrified. They wanted to scream, but in the storm they were blown away like goose feathers, flying even further away. As the world spun, Asha heard a familiar female voice. Bastard, where do you think you're going? Dragon Queen's voice was full of anger and violence. Fuck, I told you that the queen is fierce and can't be provoked. He shouted, Dragon Queen, please let me take Asha away. Dany took a closer look. It was a familiar person, the human swine Iron that she chopped off his head. However, his limbs were intact now and he was much younger. Without waiting for her reply, another middle-aged bearded man quickly came out of the formation and carried Asha away with Iron. Following that, two men in golden robes came out and picked up two living people. Dany frowned and snorted. She activated Soul Suppression Strike and hit the mindscape of the remaining people. For Taimin, and one scholar groaned as they got up. What is this situation? How did we come to the battlefield? Old Dunstan looked around blankly, shocked and scared. Chapter 1037. In this world, magic was not systematic. Ordinary extraordinaires were weak and seemed to have very low magic. However, there were two types of magic in this world that were rare even in high magic planes. They were prophecy and blood witchcraft. Night Lion and Anami's method of mastering the supreme law was one of the pinnacle of blood witchcraft, reverse evolution. Generally speaking, evolution only appeared in the descendants. From father to son, it was a positive evolution. However, the gods of the Song of Ice and Fire had achieved the reverse evolution of son to father through blood witchcraft. Using Night Lion and Lady of Light as an example, they were limited by their bloodline talent and were unable to master two laws of opposite attributes at the same time. However, through natural reproduction, as long as there were enough descendants, there would always be children who would inherit both talents at the same time. At this time, prophecy began to work again. Night Lion and Lady of Light did not need to imitate sows and really give birth to countless children. They only needed to make the most correct choice on the River of Time. For example, they saw on the River of Time that AI would give birth to a mentally retarded child at noon tomorrow. Naturally, they would not love AI and thus complete a selection of children. On the River of Time, they could see the birth of Son of Heaven, the name of Night Lion and Lady of Light's son. Then they chose this line of fate and followed the will of heaven to give birth to Son of Heaven. Compared to his parents, the chosen Son of Heaven had achieved the evolution of his bloodline. When Night Lion and Lady of Light extracted the Son of Heaven's bloodline genes and completed the transformation of their own bloodlines, wouldn't it be equivalent to the reverse evolution of son to father? Bran carefully suggested perhaps Jon is a good choice. He has the destiny of ice and death. Your child. When the long night ends and the River of Fate shows its traces again, it will be easy for you to do. Jon. Dany frowned in thought. This is your destiny. Bran said softly. The temptation of the supreme law is too great. Lalo naturally wants to learn from Night Lion and Lady of Light. However, he seems to have some misgivings about what happened to Lady of Light and Goddess of Wind. Thus he chose you and Jon in fate. Of course, this is the choice of the world's will. Lalo is only relying on his contributions as the savior of the world to seize control of the trajectory of destiny. You're mistaken. I don't seem to have any bottlenecks when it comes to fusing the Song of Ice and Fire. Danny told him about how she had learned the Song of Ice and how she had seen the secrets of the universe through the Song of Ice and Fire. At that time, my Song of Fire and Song of Ice naturally fused into the Song of Ice and Fire. There was no conflict of attributes. Are you sure it's not an illusion? You don't even have the Song of Ice, so how did you fuse it into the Song of Ice and Fire? Bran asked doubtfully. Danny shook her head. Hallucinations are different from premonitions. At my level, how could I be confused by hallucinations? Perhaps the Frost God's Song of Ice is too low level, and is not worthy of my Song of the First Fire, she guessed. Bran was speechless. What kind of reason was this? The more Danny thought about it, the more she felt that it made sense. As everyone knows, the songs of law of the same attribute can also be divided into noble and lowly ones. We all made a mistake before. Because the Song of Ice is very rare, we subconsciously thought that the Frost God's Song of Ice was unique. Danny pointed at herself and said with certainty, reality has proven that not only is it not unique, but it's also relatively low level. Its level might be as low as Lalo's Song of Fire. Dorgod put in so much effort to teach me the Song of Wind, and in the Wind of the World it still took me more than a year. After a lot of fortuitous encounters, I was lucky enough to get the Song of Wind to the top. Now, I've only heard half of the Frost God's Song of Ice without any fortuitous encounters, and my heart is already restless. What does this mean? It means that the difficulty of comprehending the Song of Ice is much lower than the Song of Wind. It means that the Frost God's Song of Ice is too low level. That seems to make sense, Bran muttered. Human marriages are about matching social status, and the pairing of laws must be balanced. The lowly Song of Ice is not worthy of the noble Song of Fire. The two are out of balance, and my Song of Fire is suppressing the birth of the Song of Ice, Danny concluded. Even if the Frost God's Song of Ice is low level, you're the one who comprehended the Song of Ice. Bran said hesitantly, this isn't contradictory. If I learn from an elementary school teacher, even if I surpass him, I won't be able to get into a famous university. No matter how talented I am, if I learn from the Frost God, I won't be able to sing the highest level Song of Ice, Danny said. Bran roughly understood what she meant. But the Frost God is the only god in the world who can sing the Song of Ice. My Song of Fire is like a judge, helping to filter out the unqualified songs of ice. If I continue to study it as my understanding of the laws of ice deepens, I'll be able to sing a high-level Song of Ice that can be accepted by the Song of Fire, Danny said. Bran said, maybe Jon can help you. Danny disagreed. The Night Lion's method can only be a knockoff, and they'll never be able to sing the real Song of Ice and Fire. Think about it and you'll understand. The first flame is like the world, and the world can't directly give birth to a life of the same size. Just like a pregnant woman weighing 120 pounds, she'll never be able to give birth to a baby weighing more than 120 pounds. For example, Danny, even with the support of the world's will, she only had the talent of spiritual bestowment. From spiritual bestowment to mastering the first flame was tens of thousands of miles away. Even at her current level of cultivation, she had only mastered a trace of the first flame's characteristics. To put it simply, before she surpassed the world, she would never be able to give birth to a descendant who could naturally master the first flame. However, I can't waste Jon's talent for nothing. Danny's mind was filled with thoughts. The dwarf had lived through Journey to the East, and he was currently doing well in barren land. He did not seem to have any signs of dying, so there was no need for him to fill the hole for now. However, it was not a good idea to stay idle. Perhaps he had to come out and move around. Bran's heart suddenly turned cold, and he had an ominous feeling. Your Majesty, what do you plan to do? Now that we've fallen out with the Frost God, if we can take away his Song of Ice, how big of a blow would it be to him? However, the seed of the Song of Ice that I've comprehended is suppressed by the Song of Fire, and it can't break out of the ground. Why don't we remove the seed and leave it with Jon so that he can help incubate and cultivate it? When the Frost God loses the Song of Ice, He'll be like the Light King without the Song of Light. It'll be so awkward that he'll die of embarrassment. Let's see how he can still be so arrogant, haha. Thinking of this, Danny could not help but laugh out loud. How do we leave it with him? Bran asked in surprise. Jon is a believer of the old god, and now I'm the old god. Isn't it common for the main god to divide a part of his Song of Laws, and give it to his believers or subordinate gods to observe and learn? Danny said with a smile. Was Prime Minister Turtle's Song of Water not a gift from Mother Lone River? In the early days, Wrathhowl, and now Danny had also received gifts from the Door God. In the Door God's inheritance, there was his Song of Wind. In theory, Danny had always controlled 100% of the Song of Wind. However much her Song of Wind grew, the Door Gods would decrease, but the total number remained the same. It was also because she had been learning the Door God's Song of Wind that Danny's growth was so fast. In just a few years she had even developed the space polarity. You want to give the Song of Ice to Jon? Bran could not believe that the Dragon Queen would be so kind. My goal is to gather the Supreme Law Song of Ice and Fire. How can I give the Song of Ice to someone else? Even if you provide the seed of the Song of Ice, once Jon sings the Song of Ice, then the owner of the Song of Ice will be him, right? Bran said. He's my believer, and he used my seed to sing the Song of Ice. When the time comes, his Song of Ice will have no secrets from me. In the end, the Song of Laws is also a kind of knowledge, and knowledge can be shared by more people. With my ability, if I grasp all the information of his Song of Laws, I should be able to sing a more advanced Song of Ice. Then won't the Song of Laws return to me? Of course, only the most advanced Song of Ice is meaningful to me. If it's not the most advanced, then I'll give the level 2 Song of Ice seed to Jon. Jon will obtain new insights from the Song of Ice from me, and sing the Song of Ice for the second time. This cycle will continue. One day when we combine our talents and wisdom, we'll be able to sing the most advanced Song of Ice. Then, I'll be able to sing the most powerful Song of Ice and Fire in the universe. Danny did not hide her thoughts. To a smart person, her goal could not be hidden for long. This is really... Bran did not know what to say. Your idea is genius, but Jon's sacrifice is too great. He spent countless time and effort to improve the Song of Ice, but in the end it was all for you. He's your brother Rhaega's son, did you know that? He said hesitantly. Sigh, after mastering all the Green Prophet seals, I knew about Jon's background. It was shocking. Danny was filled with emotions. But in order to save the world, someone has to sacrifice more. I'm willing to sacrifice my own nephew. You can do that? Bran was shocked. This isn't fair to Jon. He could not help but say it. Let me ask you, if I don't give him the Song of Ice seed, even if he has the mandate of heaven, will he be able to comprehend the Song of Ice before the end of the long night? It's almost impossible. He's not even a demigod, and his meditation technique is not compatible with the Ice Law. But given time, after a few thousand years, he might be able to sing the Song of Ice, Bran said. You really dare to say that? It's already extremely difficult to survive the long night, let alone a few thousand years. Now we need to use the great struggle to strip the Frost God of his position as a true god. Fine, he has many laws, and we can't strip him of his position as a true god. But losing his position as the true god of ice will definitely be a heavy blow to him. Forget it, I'll ask him himself. With a thought, Danny traversed hundreds of kilometers and found the King's Landing. Oh, Jon had left the King's Landing, and was leading his troops to set up camp in Twilight Valley. On the cliff castle overlooking the entire town and port, Jon was holding the Sisters of Darkness in his hand, sparring with the Volunteer Corps soldiers in the open-air training ground. Why did you leave the King's Landing? Danny asked casually. Jon was shocked and almost dropped his sword. He hurriedly said a few words to the knight opposite him, and took off his heavy combat gear, and came to the empty armory. Your Majesty, is there anything I can help you with? He asked softly. I have a glorious and great mission, and I'm not sure if you're willing to accept it. Danny explained everything and finally added, if you can take away the Frost God's Song of Ice, even if it's just the beginning, the difficulty of ending the long night will be greatly reduced. Jon did not expect the Dragon Queen to say this to him. He was stunned for a long time. and then said hesitantly, "Can I ask Bran?" Chapter 1038. Just as they were about to attack, Nightsure stopped them and warned the Dragon Queen. "Dany, Liz, to tell you the truth, this is the Smoke Sea, the core area that seals Balerion and the Valeglia Peninsula. 400 years ago, the 14 fire peaks erupted at the same time. The Valeglia continent was like cow dung under a firecracker. It collapsed and an immeasurable amount of chaotic high-energy magic gushed out from the core of the earth. Whether it was the tsunami, the volcanic smoke, or the high-energy magic that cursed everything, they could easily destroy all living creatures in the world. The tsunami caused a flood that drowned the entire continent. The volcanic smoke covered the sun, and the world entered a cold and dark night ahead of time. The chaotic curse magic was even more terrifying. Even the gods did not dare to touch too much of it. If the catastrophe was allowed to ravage the world, no one would survive except the gods. It's us, hundreds of us, who set up a super sealing formation around the Valyrian Peninsula, sealing off the long summer and the nearby seas within a few thousand kilometers of it. Just the aftermath of the tsunami destroyed the Free Girls Island in Slaver's Bay, washing away the coastal buildings in Slaver's Bay, New Gith, Sosros, and Volantis. Now the tsunami is gone, and most of the volcanic ash has settled. However, the chaotic high-energy fire magic did not leak out at all. It is all gathered in the sky above Long Summer. You should have seen it before." Speaking of this, Nightsure gave Anami a look. The two demon gods drew a mysterious trajectory in the air with their fingers at the same time, chanting an ancient magic spell. Dany held the weirwood staff tightly and looked at them coldly. Pop, pop, pop. The dome that enveloped the battlefield exploded with bubbles one after another. Every time a bubble exploded, it would reveal a different scenery outside. Dany looked around and found that this space was surrounded by dark red magma. The flowing palace stopped at the mouth of the volcano. Below it was a magma pool. There was boiling seawater and thick black smoke in all directions. "Rise!" Nightsure shouted. His hand seemed to be lifting something heavy. Because he was using too much strength, his furry face started to distort. Along with his actions, a set of magic circles that looked like the atomic structure of organic macromolecules rose from the bottom to the top. The atoms were the size of footballs and colorful. Their spacing varied from a few meters to dozens of meters. There were millions of them, covering the entire battlefield. "Watch carefully." The night lion roared again. The bright red atom closest to Dany was suddenly enlarged by hundreds of times. After the fine lines on the surface of the atom were enlarged, countless tadpole-sized mysterious runes appeared. "This is the sealing formation. We are all at the core of the formation." Dany sneered. "So." Night Lion waved his hand, an atom shrank back to its original size. He said solemnly, "Since we want to kill you, of course, we have studied all your trump cards. You have the Windraven, so you can use the spatial blade that can cut through god nations. I have to say your cultivation level isn't particularly high, but your strength is exceptionally strong. Even Old Fish and Liang Mu couldn't use the sword that pierced through the cage of wind and the hall in the clouds. Facing it, we can't handle it alone. Even if we swarm you, we will suffer heavy casualties. Besides the Windraven, there are also the Fire Raven. Back in Winterfell, only a few dozen Fire Ravens were able to interrupt the Frost God's forbidden spell. If 1,000 Fire Ravens self-destruct at the same time, at least 60% of our 300 gods will die. Besides the Windraven and the Fire Raven, you also have the Megalosaurus. You have surpassed Balerion and can use 5 dragon souls at the same time. You were using the economy to control the world's food production. Because of your plan, the world's food reserves had at least doubled. When you were 18, you drowned God blabbered on and on about the Dragon Queen's deeds. Dany blushed as she listened, and her expression became awkward. "I didn't expect the Dragon Queen to be so great." Taimin and the others opened their mouths, their jaws almost dropping to the ground. The more the mermaid spoke, the more determined her expression became. The worry in her heart completely disappeared. She announced with a tone of certainty, "Kindness is your nature. Sacrificing your own interests for the greater good is your code of conduct. I see through your heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys. In your left chest, there is a sacred red heart that shines with a kind golden light. Danny, rise, be honest. You will sacrifice yourself to save the world." This guy is shameless, but I have to admit that he's right. What do you think, Bran? Danny said shyly. Bran hummed. Can we change the topic? For example, I'm already prepared and can start at any time. Chapter 1039. Now I finally understand why the future powerhouses would carve a boat and send a sword to you. Bran's tone was complicated. Unless you completely give up on the plan to devour Balerion, the smoke sea will always be a death trap. You can't avoid it, and you can't resist it. Only when you merge with Balerion can Valeglia's 6,000 years of civilization be considered the final achievement. Once you give up on Balerion, the incomplete, you may never be able to sing the perfect song of the first flame. That's cruel and decisive. Danny sighed. So, have you made your decision? Night Lion asked in a low voice. Sigh, you guys are so meticulous that I don't even have a way out. What else can I do? Danny looked helpless. She raised her weirwood staff as if she was surrendering. Very good. Inami smiled happily. The other gods also smiled. Your Majesty, sob sob sob. Bruno cried. He looked up at the sky and cried, "Oh heavens, oh earth, why did you allow this to happen? The greatest queen in the world, because of her own righteousness, will die in the hands of thieves. Where is the justice?" Clang! Dunstan's blood boiled. He pulled out Red Rain, an ancestral steel sword, from his waist and roared at the Dragon Queen, "Your Majesty, don't give up so easily. I don't know what 0 2 Belly is, but I'm willing to fight with you until the end. Even if I kill one more demon, I'll feel better. Your Majesty, please let me die before you." Tanner Drogu's gaze was firm. Your Majesty, we're willing to die for you. The other two Thai men didn't hesitate either. They pulled out their swords and glared at the gods above them. Mere ants, how dare you pull out your swords against the gods? Get away from me, don't be an eyesore. Lalo roared. His powerful aura once again bent the knees of the 5 mortals. But this time they straightened their backs. Even if their faces were twisted and bleeding, they still struggled to point their swords at Lalo. They are your believers. What do you think we should do? Night Lion held back Shadow Demon, who was about to go berserk, and turned his gaze to the mermaid. When you kill ants, do you even care about what they're doing or saying? Inami's expression was impatient. This is more important. Don't get distracted. Yishur and Lalo both calmed down and nodded in agreement. You're right. At this moment a sudden change occurred. Crackle pop, without any warning. Grey Sea King suddenly turned his head and blew at Inami's left temple. The slender stream of air was like a sharp sword, emitting the sound of burning wood and flashing an ear-piercing white light. Strangely, when he saw the white light, he didn't feel anything in his eyes, but his ears hurt. Inami did not expect her subordinate god to betray her main god. But the moment the Grey Sea King attacked, the line of faith between the two was completely broken. Therefore, although he was caught off guard, he was not completely defenseless. Bastard! He still had the chance to curse. Then, the golden helmet exploded like a piece of paper, and a handful of blood with white brain juice burst out of the temple. It was a terrible wound, but the deadly witchcraft that Grey Sea King learned from the spear shrimp did not achieve the expected effect of a headshot. The change was too sudden. Danny and the other gods were stunned. Grey Sea King, you're asking for death. They were stunned. The giant beside Inami was furious and subconsciously swung his stick at Grey Sea King. Grey Sea King was tall, close to 2.5 meters, but at this moment he was like a slippery loach. His thick waist was like a thin willow branch in the wind. He bypassed the giant stick and found the right opportunity to blow at Inami for the second time. But this time the mermaid was more prepared. Splash! The water waves condensed into a green water wall beside her. She was like Lu Bu, who had his chi return restriction removed by the modifier. She held the 3-meter-long black sword in her hand and kept cutting grass. The gods, who had been ignored, were at a loss for what to do. This wasn't the right script. Damn it, Inami is suffering from the backlash of her faith and has lost her mind. Red Bull Akun's expression was terrible. That idiot. He should have made things clear to his believers before this. Could she have kept it a secret? Lalo sighed. Why don't we help Inami suppress the rebellion first? An evil god suggested. Shit. What if Danny and Rise take the opportunity to escape if we are distracted? Akun scolded in a low voice. Sigh. Danny and Rise agreed to be executed, but this happened. What should we do now? Pale Holy Child said helplessly. Danny heard her name and looked up. At the same time, Night Lion looked over. The two looked at each other. Danny smiled, but Night Lion was very embarrassed. Why don't we let Inami do her own thing and we can talk about our own? He forced a smile. Chapter 1040. Look at these iron seed, they sacrifice themselves for you without fear of death. Aren't you touched? Now, you should be able to sacrifice yourself for the humans of the world, right? Nightshore stared into Dragon Queen's eyes and said slowly, what kind of logic is this? Danny's mouth twitched. Not to mention that they are all doing it for their own righteousness and beliefs, even if part of the reason is because of me. But if they sacrifice themselves for me and I sacrifice myself for them, won't everyone be sacrificed? Or do we humans deserve to be sacrificed? Do you want to drag the whole world down with you? Shadow Demon Lalo shouted in disbelief. How can you be so vicious? Danny was speechless for a moment. If you want to distort black and white, just say it. I didn't expect you to believe it yourself. What do you want to do? Nightshore said coldly. It's very simple. I want to clean up all of you demons and return the world to a peaceful state, Danny said righteously. If the strength exceeds 0, to Bailey it will destroy the seal core. You saw it, I didn't lie to you, Nightshore said in a deep voice. I believe you didn't lie to me. Do you plan to kill all of us with witchcraft that is lower than 0? To Bailey? Lalo laughed and said, if 1,000 fire crows self-destruct together, more than half of our gods will die. If 1,000 fire crows self-destruct one after another, I alone can swallow them all in one gulp. Why bother? Isn't it better to die quietly? Nightshore was worried. What if you get emotional during the battle and don't control your strength well? If it exceeds 0, to Bailey, won't it be too late for regrets? It's better to die peacefully. Die a worthy death and die without regrets. Don't talk nonsense with them. The power projected from upstream is too vast. My soul is almost annihilated, Bran said with difficulty. What power? Danny asked curiously. I don't know, but I have a hunch that it was prepared for this scene. You can use it without worry. You don't have to worry about the core seal. You don't have to worry about anything because the future experts will definitely know about today's battle and make the best choice, Bran said. Danny nodded and landed on the ground beside Dunstan and the others. Under the puzzled gazes of the gods, she raised the weirwood cane with both hands. My eyes are filled with joy. It's time to clean up, she said faintly, but her voice spread in all directions. Although she didn't know what the ultimate weapon was, there was one thing that she was absolutely certain of. It was something that could sweep through 300 gods and demons. It was something that couldn't be faked even after 10,000 years. She definitely couldn't let it go so easily. Arrogant. Everyone, let's attack together. Even if the world explodes, we must kill her today. The horseshoe military god said angrily. Yishur hesitated for a moment before he clenched his teeth and said with hatred, according to the previous plan, the powerful heavenly gods who have comprehended 2 laws will stand at the front. Everyone, prepare your strongest sorcery. Let's focus on 10 waves of attacks. Alright. 300 gods and demons answered in unison. Then, more than 50 demon gods stepped out from the crowd and formed a defensive system according to the formation. At the same time, the Dragon Queen's side was also going all out. For the first time, Blackie, Little White, Little Green, Little Gold, and Little Red, The 5 megalosaurus dragon souls entered their bodies and fused with Danny with their respective 9-colored vortex meditation foundation. Buzz buzz, the 5 dragon souls were overclocked. The power was too strong. The space around Danny trembled violently, and pitch-black cracks that looked like broken porcelain bowls appeared. Even the drowning god, whose eyes were bloodshot from killing, shuddered and woke up from his stupor. After she woke up, she shouted in horror, "How is this possible? Just the violent aura alone is close to zero. To Bailey. The core of the ceiling formation is really going to break. Danny Leezy, don't go crazy. Where's your kindness? Damn it, we were all wrong about her. She's just like us. Her face is black, but her heart is even blacker." Red Bull Akuan left the defensive formation formed by the powerful heavenly gods and flew away without looking back. "Kuan, what are you doing?" The gods didn't understand. "The formation is going to explode. Why aren't you running?" Akuan sped up. "Fuck." Night Lion scolded. "You stupid bull. The formation isn't broken yet. Danny Leezy is deliberately mystifying things." "What?" Akuan slammed on the brakes and looked back. As expected, Dragon Queen's aura had reached its peak, and in an instant, her divine power had been exhausted. It was like she was holding it in with all her might, but all she did was let out a fart. "Are you scaring us?" He ran back again. "As expected, we weren't wrong about you. You are the kind of great hero who is willing to sacrifice yourself for others." "Ha ha ha." Shadow Demon Lalo laughed proudly. "Sigh, if only everyone was as smart as you. How good would that be?" Danny was exhausted and sighed dejectedly. "Where did your divine power go?" Akuan asked in shock. "It's all here." Danny's own divine power and spirit, together with the divine power and spirit of the 5 megalosaurus, were like a time-space pump, drawing the sword from the other end of the pipe to the present. Yes, Bran was like a plastic pipe that connected the present and the future. An extremely weak but extremely powerful energy was transmitted from the future to the present. Crack, crack, crack. It was as if a steel ball with a diameter of 8 centimeters was stuffed into a 5-centimeter pipe. Wherever the steel ball passed, the tunnel cracked. Bran's soul was torn into countless pieces. Because his soul passage connected the present and the future, the torn soul fragments all fell into the future. Now he was letting out a heart-wrenching cry. It was more painful than a real heart-wrenching cry. "Your Majesty, today, I have fulfilled my promise to you." After leaving this sentence, Bran's soul scattered. When the steel ball fell into Danny's hand, it meant that the entire Bran's plastic pipe had shattered. On the river of time, from the present to the future, Bran's soul ashes were scattered evenly. Buzz buzz buzz. Once again, pitch-black cracks appeared in the space around Dragon Queen. This time it was even more terrifying. The spiral-shaped space cracks surrounded her, forming a huge space tornado. The infinitely enlarged ceiling formation that looked like a macromolecular structure diagram was instantly crushed like a delicate flower that was sucked into a space shuttle turbine engine. Fuck. Danny was dumbfounded. Was she tricked by the people from the future? The chaotic high-energy magic is pouring in from all directions. There will be no more living people in this world. Even the deviant ghosts will be deformed. The world is going to be destroyed. Devil, I'll kill you. In desperation, the mermaid's divine power surged. Giant waves rolled up the lava in the underwater volcano and poured it down on Dragon Queen. But no matter how much lava and seawater came, they were all absorbed by the space tornado around Danny. What kind of space divine spell is this? Akun asked in shock. No, it's not space divine spell. Lalo, Inami, Night Lion, and the other gods who understood the fire chant shook their heads. It's fire. The space can't withstand the power of the fire. Cracks are appearing in it. What fire? The army god asked. The fire that can ignite the entire world. The most powerful fire in the universe. Danny laughed triumphantly. The space tornado disappeared. This meant that she had gained initial control of her new power. It was a light red flame the size of a soybean. Its color was so faint that it looked like a drop of red ink in a basin. It was illusory and looked as if it would be extinguished at any time. That's Night Lion's eyes widened. He was terrified. It was the world itself. It was very magical. Receiving the projection of the initial flame from upstream, Danny filled it with the power of her soul and imprinted a small initial flame. But no matter how small it is, it's still the initial flame. It's several levels higher than my level. Takes time to control it, but you guys just had to run. If you're not in a hurry to run, give me half an hour. Hey Anyo, where are you? Anyo had already been burned by the flames and was burned into nothing. He didn't even leave behind a last word. Danny was a little embarrassed. She could only focus on controlling the initial flame. Gradually, she could roughly control the direction of the flames. The red flames that had burned a hole in the sea of smoke with a diameter of 200 kilometers started to soar into the sky and then spread out in the sky. The flames crackled and moved like a dragon. In a flash, it went from the center of the sea of smoke to Mat Eris in the north, to the ruins of Valeglia in the south. Streaks of red flames traveled across the sky of the land of long summer. In an instant, the entire land of long summer was covered in flames. The chaotic high-energy magic power was the world's most terrifying poison and pollution source. But now it became the best fuel for the initial flame. The curse is gone. The curse is burning. I can feel it. In the land of long summer, beside the main road of Valeglia, Danny and Baristan used to stay in Blackwater Town, Chapter 177. The old priest with a twisted nose and mouth looked up at the burning sky. His face was filled with tears and excitement. One day, the noble Dragon King will lead the Megalosaurus to reappear in the world. He will help the people of Valeglia break out of their cage. The dragon flames of the Megalosaurus will ignite the sky. The entire land of long summer will be purified in the flames. We will be reborn. This is the prophecy from 400 years ago. Today it has finally come true. It's exactly as described in the prophecy. Balerion bless us. We are reborn. High Priest, it's not good. Balerion's statue has cracked, and my divine arts have been activated. Balerion, he's dead. Suddenly, the little priest's heart-wrenching wail came from the temple in the center of the village. The old priest. Chapter 1042. After the long night ended, the merchants opened up the Smoke Sea route from Slavers Bay to Volantis. The sea journey was reduced by a few thousand kilometers. But until a few hundred years later, an adventurous Targaryen discovered to his horror that under the Smoke Sea, there was a 120-kilometer deep abyss under the Smoke Sea when he was looking at the remains of the battlefield where Elder Danny List fought. Even further back in the past, there were 14 fire peaks there. Later on, the hemispherical abyss was named Danny List Canyon. The volcano where Sheep Egg was sealed was at the top of Danny List Canyon. So, his ending was predictable. He couldn't even wait for the Dragon Queen to devour him. At the beginning of the first flame, he was burned into nothingness along with the Flowing Water Palace and Inami. However, the old priest of Blackwater Town didn't have to despair too much. At this moment, there were countless priests wailing with him. Inside the anti-ghost steel fortress, modified from the Bravo's iron vault, Sea King Tormo exclaimed, "Isn't the phenomenon in the sky a sign of the fall of a true god? Why did the pale holy child fall?" It had been 2 years since the long night. The Sea King also understood the difference between a demigod, a powerful sky god, and a true god. Just now the earth shook and the sky cracked. Ghosts cried and gods wept. The rain of blood was majestic. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. Although the intensity was greater, the style was similar to when the storm god fell. So, even without consulting the old zebra man moon singer, the Sea King himself guessed that another true god had fallen. He called the old woman Moonchant over because he wanted to know which true god had died and who had killed him. Alright, he had more or less guessed the murderer. As soon as the old woman entered, another priest of the pale holy child came over and cried, "The statue is cracked, the divine arts are gone, My Lord Pale Holy Child has been killed. There was a huge change in the Valeglia Peninsula. An unprecedented upheaval. The Sea of Law is almost. The old zebra man tilted his head and thought hard, trying to find the right words. The entire Sea of Law has evaporated. The crying Pale Holy Child priest choked. It's a bit like evaporation. The old woman nodded reluctantly. But I'm not sure if it's evaporation or a rising tide. I don't care about the Sea of Law. Just tell me what happened and how it affects us. Sea King said anxiously. Your Majesty, my main god statue has cracked, and the divine technique has disappeared. The priestess of the Fisherman King's church ran over with tears on her face. The Fisherman King is Inami. It seems that the dead true god is him, the old zebra man said immediately. The Sea King furrowed his brows and nodded. The Fisher King's church had been of great help to Bravos. They had to rely on them for long nights, fishing in the coastal waters, and guarding against deviant ghosts in the water. Now that Inami had been killed, Bravos was in deep trouble. Do you know who the murderer is? The Sea King asked bitterly. Your Majesty Sea King, my master, Red Bull Akuan, Your Majesty my Lord Lalo. Before the priestess of the Fisher King could answer, another large group of priestesses ran into the main hall while howling. They're all dead? The Sea King was shocked. The others nodded with tears on their faces. Only the Red God priestess shook her head and said hesitantly, my main god statue hasn't completely cracked, and I haven't completely lost my divine technique, but I can't use it. I don't know what happened. The Sea King furrowed his brows and scanned the crowd before asking, where's Archbishop Stellan? The chief swordsman whispered, Archbishop Stellan isn't here. Then, has the Tower of Holy Light been extinguished? The Sea King asked again. It's brilliant, shining in all directions.